Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I noticed the cars because the whole street looked like it had been wrapped in plastic. It was a little after midnight, maybe closer to 12:30, and I was walking home from the Blue Heron, a bar on the edge of downtown Annapolis where my friend Dario played bass on Wednesday nights. I had only had 2 beers because I had work in the morning, but I stayed late helping him carry an amp to his van. By the time I started home, the fog had rolled in from the water so thick that the street lights looked like blurry yellow balls. My apartment was about a mile away, over near Spa Creek, and I usually liked that walk. Old houses, narrow sidewalks, brick walls with ivy, boats clinking softly in the slips if you got close enough to the water. That night felt different, only because the fog made everything close. Sounds came from the wrong places. A car door shutting somewhere behind me sounded like it was right in front of my face. I cut down Murray Avenue because it was quieter than West Street. It was one of those residential blocks with older row houses on one side and small fenced yards on the other. Every parked car along the curb was wet with condensation, not just a little misted. The windows, roofs, hoods, mirrors, everything had beads of water running down them. You could see where people had touched door handles earlier because there were finger marks in the dew. I remember thinking my jacket was not enough for the damp. The cold felt like it was sitting on top of my skin instead of in the air. About halfway down the block, I noticed one car was dry. It was parked between a silver Corolla and a dark blue minivan. Nothing fancy. An older black sedan, maybe a Buick or a Lincoln, long hood, tinted windows, no front plate. It stood out right away because every car around it looked soaked, and this one looked like it had just come out of a garage. No moisture on the windshield, no beads on the roof, even the side mirrors were clean and dull. I slowed down. At first I thought the owner had just parked there. A warm engine could keep a hood dry for a while, but there was no ticking engine sound, no exhaust smell, no little curls of steam under the front. The tires were dry too, which made less sense because the street itself was damp. Any car that had driven there would have picked up wet streaks around the tread. I walked past it, then stopped 2 cars later and looked back. The whole block was quiet. Most houses were dark. One upstairs window had a TV flicker behind curtains. Somewhere a dog barked once and then stopped. The fog hung low over the roofs and softened the power lines. I do not know why I went back. Maybe because I was a little buzzed and curious. Maybe because it looked so out of place that my brain needed to fix it. I stepped off the sidewalk and stood beside the sedan. The black paint did not reflect the streetlight the way wet paint should have. It looked flat, almost too black, like the light ended on it. I held my hand above the hood without touching. Heat came off it. Not engine heat exactly. It was not hot enough to burn, and it did not rise in waves. It felt like standing close to a person under a blanket, a steady body warmth. I touched the hood with 2 fingers. Warm. I pulled my hand back fast and looked around like someone had caught me messing with their car. No one was there. The windows were tinted dark enough that I could not see the interior. The windshield had no fog inside either. No parking permit, no dash camera, no papers, nothing hanging from the mirror. I looked for a badge or emblem, but the front grille had been removed or covered. The back of the car was hard to see because of the way it was parked tight behind the Corolla. A small click came from under the car. I stepped back. It sounded like a relay switch, the kind of quiet click you hear from old appliances. Then another click came from the driver's side door. The lock, maybe. I had not touched it. I backed onto the sidewalk and kept walking. After about 20 steps, I looked back again. The sedan's windows had fogged, not on the outside, from the inside. The windshield and side glass were slowly turning gray, like someone had breathed across them all at once. I could see the fog spreading from the center outward, blooming against the glass. Then it stopped. A clear circle opened in the fogged windshield, about the size of a hand. I stood there with my heart beating too hard, staring at that little clear spot. Nothing looked out through it. I could not see a face or movement, just darkness behind the glass. But the circle stayed clear while the rest of the windshield turned milky. I made myself turn away and walk. I got to the end of the block and crossed at the stop sign without looking back. The fog got thicker closer to the creek. My shoes made soft scuffing sounds on the wet pavement. I kept feeling like I could hear a car idling behind me, but every time I stopped, the sound stopped too. When I walked, it came back, very low, almost under the normal city noise. I passed the little pocket park by the water, the one with the bench and the crooked trash can. The street lamp there was flickering, not on and off, just dimming every few seconds. In the fog, the light looked like it was breathing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Dario. "You good?" I typed back. "Yeah, almost home." The message did not send. The little bar sat at the top for a few seconds, then failed. I had 3 bars. I tried again. Failed. That was when I noticed the time. 12:41. I had left the bar around 12:15. Even walking slowly, I should have been almost at my apartment by then, maybe already inside. But I was still by the park, only a few blocks from Murray. It felt like the walk had stretched without me noticing. I started moving faster. The sound behind me came back too. Not footsteps. Not exactly. It was more like tires rolling very slowly over damp pavement, except I could not hear an engine. I glanced over my shoulder and saw only fog and the orange blur of streetlights. No headlights. No car shape. A few seconds later, the smell changed. The street had smelled like wet leaves, brackish water, and old brick. Now there was a dry smell cutting through it. Dust on a hot bulb, warm plastic, a little bit like a heater turning on for the first time in winter. It was the same smell that had come off the hood when I touched it, though I had not noticed it clearly until then. I crossed the street just to do something different. The rolling sound crossed with me. I stopped in front of a closed antique shop and turned around fully. The street was empty. The fog was not moving. That bothered me more than anything at first. It had been drifting across the road in slow sheets, but now it hung perfectly still. The leaves on a small tree by the curb did not tremble. A flag on a porch hung straight down. Even the water sounds from the creek had faded. I could hear a faint tapping. Once, twice, 3 times. It came from somewhere in the fog ahead of me, maybe from the direction of Murray Avenue, maybe closer. It sounded like fingernails on glass. I walked the last few blocks almost jogging. My apartment building was an old converted house with 4 units and a sagging front porch. I reached it sweating under my jacket, even though the air was cold. I looked back from the porch steps before going inside. The street behind me was empty. Every parked car along my block was wet with condensation, white and shining under the lamps, except my neighbor's red hatchback. It was completely dry. I stared at it for a second, not understanding. The red hatchback belonged to Mrs. Alvarez downstairs. She never drove at night because her eyesight was bad. It had been parked there all week under a maple tree. Usually the windshield was covered with leaves and bird mess. Now it looked clean. Dry. Bare. The driver's side window had a clear hand-sized circle in the middle of fogged glass. I did not go near it. I unlocked the front door, went inside, and closed it as quietly as I could. The hallway smelled like old carpet and somebody's laundry detergent. Normal smells. I went up to my apartment, locked both locks, and stood in the kitchen without turning on lights. My hands still felt warm where I had touched the black car. Not burned, not sore, just warm. I washed it with cold water. The warmth stayed in 2 fingers. I tried texting Dario again. This time it sent. He replied right away, "You sure? You called me like 10 minutes ago and didn't say anything." I had not called him. I checked my call log. No outgoing call. I asked what he heard. He sent a voice message instead of typing. He sounded confused, almost embarrassed. "It was just quiet for a while," he said. "Like street noise, maybe. Then I heard you breathing, I think. Then there was this tapping sound. I said your name a bunch of times. Then the call ended." I played it twice, then put the phone face down on the counter. I slept badly. Every time a car passed outside, I woke up. Around 3, I heard the building pipes knock and almost got out of bed because it sounded like the tapping again. I kept seeing that clear circle on the windshield, a clean spot in the fog glass with nothing behind it. In the morning, the sun was out and the fog was gone. I left for work early because I wanted to check Mrs. Alvarez's car without looking like a lunatic. The red hatchback was wet like every other car now. Condensation on the roof, beads on the hood, damp leaves stuck to the windshield. No clear circle, no warmth. I touched the hood with the back of my hand. Cold. Mrs. Alvarez came out while I was standing there and asked if everything was okay. I said I thought I had dropped my keys near her car. She nodded and told me she had heard a truck outside around 1 in the morning. Very quiet one, she said. A truck? Maybe not. Something heavy. She looked up the street toward the corner. I asked if she saw anything. She shook her head. Only light through my curtains. White light. Like someone parked facing the house, but no engine. I did not ask more because my mouth had gone dry. At lunch, I walked back to Murray Avenue. I told myself I wanted to see if the black sedan was still there. In daylight, the street looked completely normal. Delivery van near the corner. A jogger with earbuds. Wet leaves in the gutter. The silver Corolla and blue minivan were there. The black sedan was gone. The curb space between them was empty. There was no oil spot, no tire marks, no broken glass or anything dramatic, but the pavement where it had been parked looked dry. A clean rectangle, exactly the length and width of a car, while the rest of the curb was still damp in the shade. I crouched and touched it. Warm. Barely, but warm. A man on a porch across the street watched me over his coffee mug. He was older, gray beard, redskin sweatshirt, even though they had not been called that in years. He said, "You looking for the black car?" I stood up too fast. I asked if he had seen it leave. He looked down the street, then back at me. No. I waited. He said, "It shows up sometimes." What do you mean sometimes? He shrugged like he regretted speaking. Usually when the fog comes in, parks there, sometimes over on Charles Street, sometimes down by the church. Never see anyone driving it. I asked who owned it. He took a sip of coffee and did not answer right away. Then he said, "You touched it, didn't you?" I did not like that. I said, "Why would you ask that?" "Because people touch it once." That was all he said. He went back inside, and the screen door slapped shut behind him. I went to work and got almost nothing done. I worked in scheduling for a small marina, so my job was mostly phone calls, spreadsheets, and angry boat owners who thought weather should follow their calendars. I kept staring at my 2 fingers. They still felt warmer than the others. Not painful, just different. By 4:30, a faint round mark had appeared on the pads of my index and middle finger. At first I thought it was from gripping something, but the marks were too even, pale little circles, like I had pressed my fingertips against a cold glass and left the opposite of fingerprints. I showed my coworker Naima, and she said maybe I touched a chemical. I said maybe. That evening, Dario offered to drive me home, but I told him I was fine. I was not fine, but I wanted to see if the street looked normal. I took a different route anyway, down Main and around the church, avoiding Murray Avenue completely. The fog started again around 9. It came off the creek in low strips, catching in the alleys and around parked cars. By the time I reached my block, every windshield on the street was clouded over. I stood at the corner for a minute, checking each car. All wet, all normal. Then a dome light came on inside a parked car halfway down the block. It was Mrs. Alvarez's red hatchback. The light glowed dim yellow behind fogged windows, then faded out. No door had opened. No one sat inside, at least not that I could see. I crossed to the other side of the street and kept walking toward my building. A soft click came from the hatchback. Then another click from a different car ahead of me. Then another behind me. One by one, door locks along the street clicked, each car making its own little sound. A Honda, a pickup, a minivan. Click, click, click. The sounds moved with me, matching my pace, as if the cars were waking up as I passed. I stopped under the maple tree. The clicking stopped too. The fog thickened fast. The houses across the street blurred into dark shapes. The porch light above my building turned off, then on again. In that short, dark moment, I saw a white reflection on the side window of Mrs. Alvarez's hatchback. A circle. When the porch light came back on, the circle was gone. I got inside and locked the door. I called Dario instead of texting. He answered from some loud place, probably another gig, and I told him I needed him to stay on the phone until I got upstairs. He asked what was going on. I said I would explain later. As I reached my apartment door, the call went silent. not dropped. The seconds kept counting, but the bar noise on his end disappeared. I said, "Dario?" No answer. Then the tapping started through the phone. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. At the same time, the same tapping came from outside my apartment window. I lived on the 2nd floor. I stepped backward into the hall, staring at the window at the end of my living room. The blinds were down. A pale light seeped around the edges, not bright enough to light the room, just enough to outline the slats. Something tapped once more on the glass. I hung up and turned on every light. The tapping stopped. I made myself walk to the window. The blinds shook slightly like they had been touched. I lifted one slat with my finger and looked out. No ladder, no fire escape, no tree close enough to touch the glass. The street below was foggy and wet. A few cars sat along the curb, all shining with condensation. At the far end of the block, a black sedan sat under a streetlight, completely dry. I backed away from the window and did not look again until morning. The next day was Saturday, so I did what people do when something makes no sense. I tried to gather normal proof. I bought a cheap temperature gun from Home Depot, the kind you point at grills or vents. I checked my own car, Mrs. Alvarez's car, the porch railing, the sidewalk, the brick wall, all normal within a few degrees of the outside air. I also asked Mr. Figueroa, my landlord, if the outside cameras worked. He said the front camera worked when it felt like it. I asked if I could see the footage from the night before because someone had been near my window. He got serious then and invited me into his unit to check the app. The camera showed the street in grainy black and white from 8 until 11. Fog rolled through. Cars sat parked. A raccoon crossed the sidewalk at 9:12. At 9:38, the image froze. The timestamp kept moving. The fog stopped. The raccoon, halfway under a bush, stayed still. A wet leaf in the air near the curb hung in place like it had been pinned. The freeze lasted 6 minutes. When the video resumed, the far streetlight was glowing brighter than before. A black shape sat under it, the sedan. It was already parked there. No headlights had approached. No car had turned in. One frame, empty curb. After the frozen section, black sedan. Mr. Figueroa leaned closer to the monitor. "What is that?" I said I did not know. He scrubbed forward. At 9:51, every parked car's hazard lights flashed once, just once. The sedan did not flash. At 10:04, the porch light above the building went out, then back on. The camera did not show my window because it was too high, but it caught the fog under it brightening faintly from above, like something was shining down from the 2nd floor instead of up from the street. Mr. Figueroa said he would call the police if I wanted. I said not yet. I do not know why I said that. Maybe because a weird car appeared on camera during a freeze sounded like a waste of everybody's time. Maybe because I did not want a patrol officer touching the sedan and then having warm fingers and missed calls and tapping at their windows. That night, I did not go out. I ordered food and asked the driver to leave it downstairs. Around 10:30, Naima called to check on me because I had apparently sounded strange at work. While we were talking, she went quiet and asked if I had a TV on. I said no. She said she could hear a car turn signal. I listened. There was a soft tick through the phone, steady and slow. I walked to the window, but did not open the blinds. The ticking stopped. Naima said, "Okay, that's weird." Then she said my voice had gone far away, like I was across a room. I told her I was holding the phone to my face. She said someone else was breathing. I hung up. A minute later, my phone showed an outgoing call to my own number. It rang once in my hand. The screen said, "Me." I did not answer. The voicemail appeared 3 seconds later. I played it because apparently I had lost all common sense by then. It was mostly silence, but under it was the soft sound of foghorns from the harbor, though none were sounding outside. Then came 3 taps, then a whisper, not words, just breath pressed close to a microphone. At the very end, there was a car door closing. My fingers burned warm again. The 2 pale circles on my fingertips had darkened at the edges. On Sunday morning, the sedan was gone from the end of the block. The wet street showed another dry rectangle where it had been. This time I used the temperature gun. The sidewalk around it read 46 degrees. The dry rectangle read 81. I stood there staring at the numbers until a woman walking a beagle asked if I was okay. I said yes. She looked at the curb, then at the temperature gun. "Is it back?" I felt my stomach drop. She was maybe in her 40s, wearing a green rain jacket and boots, hair tucked under a knit cap. Her beagle sniffed near the dry rectangle, then pulled hard away from it. "You've seen it?" I asked. She looked sorry she had said anything. "My husband did, last winter." "What happened?" She tugged the dog closer. "He thought someone was sitting inside, so he knocked on the window." I waited. She said there wasn't anyone, but the window cleared where he knocked, from the inside. She swallowed. "After that, our car kept being warm in the mornings. Just ours, even when it snowed." "Did it stop?" "We moved from Charles Street." She walked away before I could ask anything else. That evening, I packed a bag and went to Dario's place across town. He did not ask many questions, which was one of the reasons I trusted him. He made up the couch and put on an old movie, and for a while it felt normal. His apartment was over a print shop on a busy street. Traffic passed all night. People shouted outside after bars closed. Normal noise. At 12:41, every car alarm on the block chirped once. Dario paused the movie. We listened. Nothing followed, no alarms, no footsteps, no tapping. Then his front windows fogged from the outside, all three of them at once. A clear circle appeared in the middle pane. Dario stood up slowly. "Is that part of it?" I did not answer. The glass around the circle was wet and white. The circle stayed clean, about the size of a hand, looking out over the dark room. We were on the 3rd floor. There was no balcony, no tree, nothing but air outside, the room warmed by a few degrees. I felt it before I noticed the thermostat click. Warmth spread from the window across the floor, low and steady, like the black sedan's hood. Dario grabbed his keys and said, "We're leaving." We went down the back stairs. He drove us to an all-night diner near the highway. We sat in a booth until sunrise, drinking bad coffee and not saying much. When we returned, the windows were clear. No marks, no warmth. But his car, parked on the street overnight, was completely dry while every other car around it was wet with morning dew. He sold it 2 weeks later. I moved out of my apartment before the end of the month. I told Mr. Figueroa it was because of a better commute. He did not argue. While I was carrying the last box down, he said the cameras had stopped working whenever fog came in. He said he was replacing the whole system. I asked if the black sedan had come back. He looked at the street and said, "Not while I was looking." That was the last thing he said about it. I live in a newer building now, farther from the water, with underground parking and sealed windows. Most nights are normal. Sometimes fog still comes in, but it does not sit thick in the street the same way. I do not walk home late anymore if I can help it. The marks on my fingers faded after a few weeks, mostly. When my hands get cold, the 2 circles show up faintly, as pale against the skin. Last month, I left work late after a storm. The parking garage was damp, and every windshield on the lower level had condensation on it because the air outside was warmer than the concrete. I walked to my car with my keys ready, not thinking about anything except dinner. My car was dry. Not just the windows, the hood, roof, mirrors, everything. I stood there in the empty garage, keys in my hand, smelling warm dust and wet concrete. The temperature gun was not with me anymore. I had thrown it away when I moved. I touched the hood before I could stop myself. It was slightly warm. From somewhere behind me, deep in the garage, a car door clicked unlocked. I woke up to my watch buzzing against my wrist like it was trying to get my attention, not the alarm buzz. This was the little celebration buzz it gave when I hit a goal. I had my face half buried in the pillow, and for a few seconds I thought I had set some stupid reminder by mistake. Then I rolled over and saw the screen. 12,418 steps. It was 6:13 in the morning. I had gone to bed at 11:20 the night before with something like 3,000 steps for the day because I work from home and had barely left the apartment. I knew that because my girlfriend, Tessa, had teased me about it while we were brushing our teeth. She had hit 10,000 by lunch at the hospital, and I had said I would catch up tomorrow. I remember tapping the screen and seeing 3,284 before I put it on sleep mode. Now it said I had walked almost 9,000 steps in my sleep. My first thought was that the watch glitched. That was the easiest answer and the one I wanted. It was a 2-year-old Garmin with a cracked corner on the face, and sometimes it counted stirring pancake batter as steps. But 9,000 extra steps was not stirring in bed. That was miles. I sat up and checked my feet. I do not know why. It was just the first thing my body did. My socks were still on. Same gray socks I had worn to bed because our apartment was cold at night and the radiator in the bedroom barely worked. They looked clean. No dirt, no wet spots, no grass or gravel stuck to them. My slippers sat exactly where I had left them beside the bed. Tessa was asleep on her side, hair over her face, one hand tucked under her cheek. She had an early shift coming up, so I did not wake her right away. I just sat there with the blanket around my waist and scrolled through the watch app on my phone. The steps had started at 2:17 a.m. That was the first weird part. The app showed a spike of activity starting from a flat sleep graph. Between 2:17 and 3:04, it counted thousands of steps in a steady rhythm. Not random shakes, not the jagged pattern you get if the watch is bouncing in a bag. It looked like walking, normal walking pace. A little slow, but regular. Then there was a break of 4 minutes, then more walking, then another break. The heart rate stayed low. That was the second weird part. If I had actually walked that much, even slowly, my heart rate should have climbed. It did not. It hovered between 52 and 58 beats per minute the whole time. My sleep graph said I was in deep sleep for most of it. I took the watch off and put it on the nightstand. My wrist had a red mark under the band, deeper than usual, like it had been tightened. I did not remember tightening it. I kept it loose because I hated the feeling of it digging in. I pressed the mark with my thumb and it stayed white for a second. Tessa stirred and mumbled, "What time is it?" I said, "A little after 6. She groaned and pulled the blanket up. I said, "My watch says I walked 12,000 steps last night." She opened one eye. "In bed?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." She laughed into the pillow, still half asleep. "Maybe you finally exercised." I tried to laugh too, but it came out wrong. We lived on the second floor of an old brick fourplex in Tacoma, near 6th Avenue. The building had creaky stairs, shared laundry in the basement, and security cameras because someone had stolen packages the year before. One camera faced the front entry, one faced the back stairs. One was in the little lobby, pointed at the mailboxes and the staircase. Our landlord, Mr. Figueroa, had given everyone access to the camera app after the package thing, mostly so people would stop texting him every time an Amazon box disappeared. After Tessa left for work, I checked the cameras. The front entry camera showed nothing between midnight and morning, except a cat crossing the porch at 1:03. The back stairs were empty. The lobby camera caught the overhead light flickering around 2:15, then nothing. No me walking down the stairs, no door opening, no one going out. I checked our own indoor camera next. We had one in the living room facing the front door because Tessa's bike had been stolen from inside an old apartment years back, and she was paranoid about doors. It recorded motion events only. Nothing after 10:48 p.m. when I had gone into the kitchen for water. I should have stopped there and blamed the watch. Instead, I remembered the baby monitor. We did not have a baby. We had bought a cheap Wi-Fi camera when Tessa's mother stayed with us after surgery, and we never took it out of the bedroom. It sat on top of the dresser, mostly unplugged. Tessa had plugged it back in that week because she thought the neighbor's new dog was barking inside the building at night and wanted to prove it was not our apartment making noise. The camera saved continuous footage to a little memory card. I opened the app and went to 2:17. The video showed our bedroom in black and white infrared. Me on the left side of the bed, Tessa on the right, both of us asleep. The thin curtain moved a little from the draft near the window. The radiator pipe in the corner looked like a white vertical stripe. Nothing else. At 2:70:12, my watch screen lit up under the blanket. I saw it through the fabric, a faint square glow near my wrist. My body did not move. At 2:07:18, the step count started climbing in the app. I checked both side by side. The watch data said I was walking. The video showed me flat on my back, mouth slightly open, completely still except for normal breathing. I watched for 10 minutes. Nothing happened. The step count climbed. The camera confirmed I never left the bed. At 2:29, something in the room changed, but I almost missed it because I was staring at myself. The dresser mirror darkened. It was mounted on the wall across from the bed, and in the infrared view, it usually reflected the window and part of the ceiling. At 2:29, The reflected window went black, like someone had covered it from the outside. But we were on the second floor. The actual window beside the bed did not change. I could see the curtain moving. I could see the streetlight glow through it. Only the mirror reflection went black. Then the watch screen lit again. It pulsed 3 times under the blanket. I paused the video and zoomed in. The blanket covered my wrist, so I could not see the numbers. I went to the watch data. At the exact same second, the app marked a lap, like I'd double-tapped the button during a workout. I had not started a workout. I checked the activity log. There was a new one from overnight. Outdoor walk. Distance, 5.8 miles. Route, unavailable. Elevation gain, 1,944 feet. That made me sit back from the desk. Tacoma had hills, sure, but I had not climbed almost 2,000 feet while lying in bed. An outdoor walk meant the watch thought I was outside. My GPS track was blank, but the elevation graph was not. It rose in long, smooth sections, paused, rose again, then dipped sharply at the end, like switchbacks on a trail. I called Tessa on her break and told her more clearly what was happening. She stopped joking pretty fast. She asked if I felt okay. I said yes, except tired. She asked if I had taken anything, like sleep meds or Benadryl. I had not. Just one beer with dinner. She asked me to send her the bedroom clip. I did. She called back 5 minutes later and said, why does the mirror do that? I said I did not know. She said, watch the window at 2:41. I had stopped at 2:30. I jumped forward. At 2:41, the curtain beside the bed stopped moving. Not just stopped because the draft stopped. The whole frame seemed to settle. The little digital noise from the infrared camera went smooth. Tessa and I stayed asleep. My chest rose and fell. Hers did too. But the curtain froze in a bent shape, pulled slightly toward the glass. Outside the window, a dim light appeared. It was not bright. It was a soft gray-white glow that came through the curtain in a round patch about the size of a dinner plate. It moved slowly from the top of the window down toward the sill, then stopped. The mirror stayed black. My watch screen lit up again. This time, my hand moved. Only my hand. It slid out from under the blanket and lay palm up on top of the sheet. The movement was slow and stiff, like someone lifting it by the wrist. I did not turn my head. I did not wake up. The watch face glowed, and in the grainy footage, I could see the numbers changing too fast to read. Then my fingers started moving. They flexed one at a time. Thumb, index, middle, ring, pinky. Then back the other way. It looked almost like I was counting, but I was asleep. The step count on the app kept rising in perfect rhythm with the finger movements. Tessa was quiet on the phone while we both watched it. Finally, she said, "That's enough. Unplug that camera until I get home." I did not unplug it. I could not. I kept watching. At 2:53, my hand dropped back under the blanket. The glow outside the window moved upward and vanished. The mirror returned to normal, showing the curtain and ceiling again. The watch data showed the first walking block ending. 4 minutes later, the second block began. On the video, nothing moved that time. The step count climbed for another 22 minutes while I lay completely still. By then, I had that cold, hollow feeling you get when a situation stops being a problem to solve and turns into something you just have to sit with. I checked the apartment door. Locked, chain still on, windows latched, no mud, no footprints, no signs of anyone inside. Everything normal except the watch, the footage, and the red mark on my wrist. I took the watch to an electronics repair shop that afternoon, a little place run by a guy named Darius near Proctor. I told him it was counting steps while I slept. I did not tell him about the camera. He plugged it into his laptop, ran diagnostics, checked the accelerometer and barometer, and said the hardware looked fine. "Could be a firmware bug," he said. "Would a bug log elevation?" He shrugged. "They log all kinds of junk." He showed me the raw sensor graph because he thought that would make me feel better. It did not. The accelerometer data had a clear pattern between 217 and 338. 3 axes moving in a repeating cycle. A walking cycle. Darius frowned at it. He picked up the watch and rotated it in his hand. "You wear it on your left wrist?" "Yeah." He zoomed in on the graph. "This looks like arm swing?" "From fingers moving?" He looked at me. I had not meant to say that. I told him I had a sleep camera and my hand had moved a little. He did not ask to see the video. He just unplugged the watch and handed it back like it had become something private. "Reset it," he said. "Factory reset." Parrot fresh. I did. That night, I did not wear it. I put it in a metal mixing bowl on the kitchen counter because Tessa said maybe it was picking up vibrations from the radiator or pipes. We were both pretending that made sense. She checked the windows twice before bed. I put a chair under the bedroom doorknob, which was dramatic and useless, but made me feel slightly better. We also left the bedroom camera running. I slept badly. I woke up at every radiator knock and every car passing outside. At 2:10, I was awake. At 2:15, still awake. Tessa slept beside me, one hand under the pillow. At 2:17, the watch buzzed in the kitchen. I heard it through the wall, a soft, distant vibration against the metal bowl. Tessa woke up immediately. Was that it? The watch buzzed again. Then again. I got out of bed before I could talk myself out of it. Tessa whispered my name, but I was already at the bedroom door, moving the chair. The apartment was dark except for the microwave clock and the weak streetlight through the blinds. The floorboards were cold under my feet. In the kitchen, the watch lay in the bottom of the mixing bowl. The screen was on. Outdoor walk. The step count was climbing. The watch was not moving. I stood over it and watched the numbers go up, one by one, in a steady pace. The bowl gave a tiny tick every time the watch vibrated, but the watch itself stayed flat, face up. Then the compass app opened by itself. I had never used the compass on that watch. The little arrow spun twice and pointed toward the living room window. Then the screen changed to an elevation reading, 3,112 feet, 3,116, 3,121. I backed away from the counter. Tessa stood in the hallway with her phone in her hand, recording. Her face looked pale in the screen light. The blinds in the living room moved. Just slightly. Not like wind. They lifted from the bottom, 2 inches maybe, then settled. The window was closed and locked. Beyond the blinds, the street outside looked normal. Parked cars, wet pavement, the yellow porch light from the building across the street. Then the room got quiet. The refrigerator hum stopped. The radiator stopped ticking. A car that had been passing outside faded into silence before it should have. The only sound was the little metal tick from the watch in the bowl. Tessa whispered, "Do you see that?" I looked where she was pointing. The security chain on the front door was hanging straight out from the door, horizontal, like gravity had changed direction just for that small piece of metal. It did not swing. It stayed perfectly straight, pointing into the room. The watch buzzed harder. The bowl started sliding. Slowly, at first, it moved across the counter toward the edge, metal scraping on laminate. I grabbed it without thinking. The second my fingers touched the bowl, the watch stopped counting. The silence broke. The refrigerator came back on with a clunk. A car hissed past outside. The chain dropped and tapped against the door. Tessa made a sound like she had been holding her breath. I looked at the watch. It showed 1,944 steps, same number as the elevation gain from the night before. Tessa said, "Take it off. Take the battery out." "You can't take the battery out." "Then throw it away." I should have. Instead, I put it in a Ziploc bag, then inside a coffee can, then in the trunk of my car. I do not have a good reason for that. Part of me wanted it out of the apartment. Part of me wanted to keep the evidence. It is hard to explain how your brain splits like that when something impossible is happening. You want to run from it and document it at the same time. We stayed awake until morning. The bedroom camera showed nothing new that night, except both of us leaving the room at 2:17 and coming back at 2:23. But the living room camera had a gap. It recorded us walking into the kitchen, Tessa holding up her phone, me standing by the counter. Then at 2:19, the image froze for 11 seconds. When it resumed, I had my hand on the bowl. The audio during the frozen section was not frozen. It had a soft crunching sound, like footsteps on gravel. Tessa's phone video was worse. It showed the watch in the bowl. It showed the step count climbing. It showed the chain standing out from the door. But when the bowl slid, the video blurred, and for about 2 seconds, the living room window showed a reflection that did not match the room. It looked like a hillside, dark ground, pale rocks, a narrow path lit by something off camera. The reflection sat in the glass behind the blinds where our couch should have been. Then it snapped back to the apartment. Neither of us had a good answer. The next morning, I checked the car trunk before work. The coffee can was still there, the Ziploc was still inside, the watch screen was off. The app on my phone had synced overnight anyway. It showed a completed activity at 2:17 a.m. Outdoor walk. Distance 0.91 miles. Steps 1,944. Elevation gain 1,944 feet. Route unavailable. Calories 0. Heart rate unavailable. The map thumbnail was gray except for one white line running straight up and down, like a path drawn over nothing. I did not go to work. I called in sick and drove to Point Defiance Park because I needed somewhere open, somewhere outside, somewhere that did not feel like the apartment. It was a gray morning with low clouds and cold mist off the water. I parked near the overlook and sat in the car with the coffee can on the passenger seat. I opened it. The watch was on. The screen showed a compass arrow pointing into the woods. I turned the can around. The arrow adjusted, still pointing to the same direction beyond the trees. I got out of the car and stood by the hood, holding the watch in the Ziploc like it was evidence from a crime scene. The arrow pointed down a trail. I did not want to follow it. I followed it anyway. The park was not empty, but that section was quiet. Wet cedars, ferns, muddy path. The sound of the road behind me faded after a couple turns. The watch did not count steps while I walked. That bothered me more than if it had. The step count stayed at 0, but the compass stayed locked. It led me off the main path to a narrow side trail I had never noticed. I stopped there because the trail dropped steeply toward the bluff and the mud looked slick. The arrow pointed straight down it. I could smell salt water and wet leaves. Then the watch screen changed. Elevation, 3,112 feet. I was maybe 200 feet above sea level. The air pressure in my ears shifted. I heard the same crunching sound from the camera audio, faint and far away, like someone walking on gravel behind trees. I looked back up the trail. No one was there. Ahead, through the cedars, a pale light moved. Not bright, not a beam, more like a round piece of cloud drifting between trunks at chest height. It passed behind one tree and in front of another, smooth and silent. I stood still, holding the watch in both hands. The watch vibrated once for every step sound I heard. Crunch, buzz, crunch, buzz. The light stopped. The compass arrow spun and pointed at my chest. I backed up one step. The watch counted it. One step, then another. 2. I turned and walked fast back toward the main path. The step count kept going now, matching me. Normal. Real. My own feet on wet dirt, my own breath, my own heart hammering. When I reached the wider trail, a woman in a yellow raincoat passed with a golden retriever, and I almost grabbed her arm just because she was real and ordinary. I made it back to the car and threw the watch into the passenger footwell. On the drive home, it buzzed once from the floor. Goal reached. I did throw it away after that. Not in our building trash. I drove to a gas station on South 19th, used their outside bin, and buried the watch under fast food bags and paper cups. I felt ridiculous and relieved at the same time. For 2 nights, nothing happened. No steps, no camera glitches, no chain moving. Tessa slept with the lamp on anyway. I pretended I hated the light, but was glad for it. On the 3rd morning, I woke at 6:13 to Tessa standing beside the bed. She was staring at her phone. "What?" I asked. She turned the screen toward me. Her health app showed 12,418 steps, recorded while she was asleep. I looked at her wrist. She was not wearing a watch. She did not own one. Her phone had been on the charger across the room all night. We checked the bedroom camera. It showed both of us in bed. At 2:17, the screen brightened, not from inside the room, but from the mirror. The dresser mirror filled with a gray-white light. Tessa slept through it. I slept too. Neither of us moved. At 2:41, the mirror reflection changed. For a few seconds, it did not show our bedroom. It showed a narrow path climbing through dark rocks, the same kind of path I had glimpsed in the living room window. The image shook slightly, like it was being seen through breath or heat. Then 2 shadows crossed it, one tall, one shorter, walking side by side. The camera never showed us leaving the bed. The footsteps started after I crossed the halfway line. I had cut through the soccer complex because it saved me maybe 10 minutes on the walk home from the late bus. It was stupid, but not unusual for me. I lived on the east side of Monroe, North Carolina, in a little duplex behind the Food Lion, and the bus from Charlotte dropped me off near the high school. If I stayed on the main road, I had to walk the long way around the fenced fields and the retention pond. If I cut through the county soccer park, I could pop out behind the baseball diamonds and be home in 15 minutes. It was a Thursday night in February, cold enough that my breath showed, but not cold enough for frost. The rain had stopped an hour earlier, so the grass was wet and heavy, and the air smelled like mud and those rubber pellets from the turf field. All the games had been canceled because of the weather. The parking lot was empty, except for one maintenance truck parked by the equipment shed with no lights on. The big floodlights were off. Only the yellow security lamps by the bathrooms and concession stand were working, and they did not reach the far fields very well. I had my backpack over one shoulder, my lunch container knocking around inside it, and my phone in my hand with the flashlight on low. I was tired. I had been on my feet all day at a warehouse job near Matthews, labeling boxes and listening to the same manager tell people to move faster. My girlfriend Alina had texted asking if I wanted her to pick me up, but she had an early shift at the clinic, and I told her not to worry about it. The park looked normal when I entered through the gap by the chain link fence. Empty bleachers, wet benches, nets sagging from the rain, the kind of place that felt too big when no one was using it. I could hear cars on the highway behind me and one dog barking somewhere in the neighborhood beyond the trees. I stepped onto the first field, and the grass made that soft, sucking sound under my shoes. Then another step answered mine. At first, I thought it was the echo off the metal bleachers. My shoes were damp, and the field was quiet enough that little sounds carried weirdly. I kept walking. Step, step. Mine first. Then another one, half a beat behind. I slowed down without meaning to. The other footsteps slowed too. I stopped. They stopped. I stood there near the painted center circle, holding my phone down by my thigh, not wanting to swing the light around too fast. My heart had not started racing yet. I was still in that first stage where your brain tries to make the normal explanation fit. Maybe someone else had cut through behind me. Maybe it was another person coming from the bus stop. Maybe it was a kid from the neighborhood messing around. I listened. The park was quiet. The highway made a steady hiss in the distance. Water dripped from the roof of the concession stand into a puddle. A flag rope tapped against a pole near Field 3. I looked over my shoulder, just a quick glance. Nothing. The field behind me was empty. I could see the pale lines in the grass curving back toward the fence. The security light at the bathrooms made a weak orange pool on the pavement. But there was no person in it, no shape moving behind the bleachers, no dog, no bike, nothing. I turned forward again and started walking. 2 steps later, it happened again. My right foot sank into the wet grass, and just behind me came the same sound. Not an echo. It had weight to it, a wet shoe pressing down. Then my left foot, then the other left foot. I stopped harder that time. The steps stopped at the same instant. I remember looking down at my own feet like they had betrayed me somehow. My shoes were black Nikes with worn soles, and they had little clumps of grass stuck to the sides. I shifted my weight to test it. The grass squeaked. No answering sound. I said, "Hello?" My voice went flat across the field and came back smaller than it should have. No one answered. I turned around fully. I moved the phone light in a wide, slow sweep from the fence to the bleachers to the goal. The beam caught silver drops on the netting and made them shine. It caught a crushed water bottle near the sideline. It caught the white curve of the center line behind me. No person. The weird thing was how open it all was. A soccer field did not give much cover. If someone had been 10 or 20 feet behind me, I should have seen them, even if they dropped flat. The grass was short. There were no trees until the far edge. The nearest bleachers were off to my left, maybe 40 yards away. I told myself the sound was coming from my backpack, something inside shifting after each step. I slipped it off my shoulder and held it in my hand. My lunch container knocked once against my thermos. I walked again, step, step behind me. I froze so fast the straps of the backpack swung and hit my leg. Behind me, the other step stopped too. Now I was scared. It was not loud, that made it worse. It was careful, matching me, not chasing me. I stood there with my mouth open, breathing white into the dark, and I felt the back of my neck get tight. I kept thinking of how the field must look from above, me standing alone in the middle with my phone light pointed at the ground. I wanted to call Alina, but my pride got in the way for maybe 5 seconds. Then I decided pride was stupid and opened her contact. The phone showed one bar, then none. That was odd because I usually had service there. I tried anyway. The call failed right away. I tried my brother Matthias. Failed. The flashlight flickered, not off, just dim for a second, like the battery dipped. It was at 38%. Plenty. I decided to get off the field and back toward the road. I did not run because I was afraid the other footsteps would run too, and I did not want to hear that. I walked faster, cutting diagonally toward the parking lot. The other steps followed. They stayed the same distance behind me, 10 feet maybe 15. Every time my shoes pressed to the wet grass, another pair pressed down just after. Same pace, same stride. If I shortened my steps, they shortened. If I took a longer step over a muddy patch, it took a longer step too. I looked back again. Empty. The emptiness started feeling personal, like the field was showing me exactly how alone I was and making sure I understood it. The white goal at the far end sat crooked in the dark. The net moved slightly in the wind. The bleachers were just black bars. Then I noticed the sound had changed. The steps behind me were still on grass, but I had reached the sideline where the ground turned to gravel. My own shoes crunched on the little stones. The sound behind me did not crunch. It kept making the soft, wet grass sound, even though whatever was following should have reached the gravel too. I stopped with one foot on the gravel and one foot still on the grass. The sound stopped. I looked back at the line I had just crossed. The phone light showed my footprints pressed dark into the wet grass. They came in a diagonal line from midfield, clear as anything. Behind them, maybe 2 or 3 feet to the right, there was another line of depressions. I did not understand them at first. They were not shoe prints. They were just oval dark spots, each one about the size of my palm, pressed into the grass at the same intervals as my steps. They ended maybe 10 feet behind me. While I watched, the last 2 slowly rose back up. Not like grass springing back after being stepped on. Slower. The dark ovals filled with blades until they disappeared. I backed onto the gravel. The phone light flickered again, and this time it went out. The screen stayed on, but the flashlight died. I tapped the button. Nothing. I locked and unlocked the phone. The flashlight icon turned blue like it was on, but no light came from it. A security lamp by the bathrooms buzzed and blinked. Once, twice. Then all the lights in the park went out. I was not in total darkness because the sky had that cloudy city glow, but it was close. The fields became one flat gray shape. The goalposts looked like pieces of bone. The bathroom building disappeared except for a darker square where it blocked the sky. I started walking again, faster. The footsteps started again too. Now they were on gravel. Crunch. Crunch. That was the first time I almost ran. I had no idea why the sound had waited to change, but hearing it on the gravel made it feel closer, more real. I could picture a person behind me, even though I had not seen one, someone lowering their feet carefully into the same rhythm as mine. I turned my head halfway, then stopped myself. Looking back had not helped. It only made the empty field worse. I reached the paved path between the concession stand and the bathrooms. My shoes slapped wet pavement. Behind me, the other shoes slapped wet pavement. Same half-beat delay. There were security cameras mounted under the concession roof. I had seen them before because the county put up signs about vandalism. I remember thinking, good, there would be footage. That thought made me feel a little less crazy until the camera above the service window made a tiny clicking sound and tilted down. It should not have moved. It was not one of those dome cameras that track. It was a fixed white bullet camera mounted on a bracket. But I heard it click, and when I looked, it was pointed toward the ground instead of the path. I whispered, "Nope," without meaning to. The footsteps stopped when I stopped whispering, not when I stopped walking. I had taken one more step after the word, and the sound behind me had not matched that last step. It stopped late, like it had listened first. I did not like that. I started moving again, not caring about pace now. I headed for the parking lot, where the maintenance truck sat by the shed. If someone was in it, I would knock on the window. If not, I would use it as something solid between me and whatever was going on. The truck was farther away than it should have been. I know that sounds impossible in such a small place, but the path felt stretched. The concession stand stayed on my right longer than it ever had. I passed the same trash can twice, or at least I thought I did. It had a red fast food cup on top and a strip of caution tape tied to the handle. I noticed it the first time because the cup was rocking in the wind. Then 30 seconds later, there it was again. Same cup, same tape, same little rocking motion. I checked my watch. It said 9 and 18. That made no sense. The bus had dropped me at 8:47. I had entered the park around 8:55. Even walking slowly, I should have been home by 9:10. I looked at my phone. The top corner also said 9:18, then glitched to 9:11, then back to 9:18. The footsteps were still behind me, not getting closer, not falling back. I stopped near the corner of the bathroom building. The other steps stopped. I could see the parking lot now, or part of it. The maintenance truck was there, but the cab windows were dark. Beyond it, the gate to the road was open. The road itself was empty. I turned around fast. Nothing was there. But the sound did not come from the field anymore. It came from the other side of the bathroom wall, maybe 6 feet away. A single wet footstep on concrete. I backed up so hard my shoulder hit the brick. The backpack slipped from my hand and landed in a puddle. I left it there. I was looking at the corner of the building, waiting for someone to step around it. No one did. The air smelled different near that wall, not sewage or cleaning supplies. It was like hot metal, almost like when brakes overheat on a hill. My eyes watered. I pulled my sleeve over my nose. Another footstep sounded from behind the wall. Then another, matching the exact 2 steps I had taken backward a moment before. That was when I ran. I ran across the parking lot toward the open gate, and the footsteps ran too. They did not sound rushed or heavy like a person sprinting. They sounded like a recording of my own running, played just behind me. My shoes slapped puddles. The other shoes slapped puddles. My breathing got ragged. Behind me, something breathed once after I did, a thin copy of the sound. I reached the gate and grabbed the cold metal post to swing myself around it. The second I crossed onto the sidewalk outside the park, the footsteps stopped, completely. I kept running another block before I made myself slow down. There were houses now, normal houses with porch lights and cars in driveways. A TV flickered blue in someone's living room. A white cat sat under a parked Honda and watched me pass like I was the strange thing. My phone came back all at once. 3 missed calls from Alina. 2 texts asking where I was. A voicemail from a number I did not recognize. The time said 9:42. I called Alina while I was still walking. She answered on the first ring and sounded scared. She said I had called her 12 minutes earlier, but when she picked up, I did not speak. She heard footsteps and wind and what she thought was someone dragging a hand over a microphone. Then a man's voice said her name. I told her I had not called. She asked where I was. I said near the food line, almost home. She stayed on the phone with me until I got inside the duplex and locked the door. I turned on every light in the place, checked the bathroom, checked the bedroom, checked the closet like an idiot. No one was there. My backpack was gone, obviously, because I had dropped it by the bathroom building. My work badge was in it, my lunch container, my charger, and a hoodie I liked. The thought of going back for it made my skin feel too tight. Alina came over anyway, even though I told her not to. She brought her cousin Devin, who had a big flashlight and acted like he wanted something to happen. I did not want to go back, but I also did not want my badge sitting there all night, so around 10:20 the 3 of us drove to the park. Everything was normal. The security lights were on, the maintenance truck was gone, cars passed on the road, the fields were wet and empty. We walked through the open gate together, and I showed them where I had dropped the backpack. It was not by the bathroom wall. It was in the middle of field 2, near the center circle. I saw it before the others did, because the reflective strip on the strap caught Devin's flashlight. It lay flat in the grass, soaked through, exactly around where I had first heard the footsteps. I know I did not drop it there. I had carried it all the way to the building and dropped it when I hit the wall. I remembered the sound of it landing in the puddle on the pavement. Devin said maybe I got turned around. I did not argue because I knew how it sounded. We walked out onto the field to get it. The grass was shiny under the flashlight. My original footprints were still there, a messy diagonal path from the far side. The other oval marks were not. The field showed only my shoes, and then, around the backpack, a large clean patch where the wet grass all leaned inward toward the bag. Alina noticed first that the bag was warm. She picked it up and dropped it right away. Steam rose faintly from the fabric in the cold air. Devin touched it with the back of his hand and said, "What the hell?" It was warm like it had been sitting over a vent. Not hot enough to burn, but much warmer than anything left in wet grass should have been. The metal zipper pulls were warmer than the fabric. My lunch container inside was warm too, and the leftover rice had a cooked smell even though it had been cold since afternoon. We took the bag home in the trunk. I did not open it until the next day, in daylight, on my kitchen floor. Nothing was missing except my work badge. I had clipped it to the inside pocket that morning. The clip was still there, but the badge was gone. I checked every pocket, nothing. On Monday, I told my supervisor, Candace, that I lost it on the bus. She printed me a new one and grumbled about the replacement fee. Around noon, she came by my station holding a plastic evidence bag like the ones we used for damaged labels. She said, "Didn't you say you lost your old badge?" It had been found in the break room microwave. No one knew who put it there. The badge was warped into a shallow curve, the plastic cloudy and bubbled. My photo was still visible, but the eyes in the picture had turned black from the heat. The barcode on the back was unreadable. Candace thought someone was playing a prank, but no one admitted it, and the cameras near the break room had not recorded anyone opening the microwave between 6 and 11 that morning. I stopped cutting through the soccer park after that. For a while, I went the long way, even in rain. Alina teased me gently at first, then stopped because she could tell I was not laughing. A month went by. Then 2. Spring came in, and the park filled up again with kids in bright jerseys and parents yelling from folding chairs. It looked like a normal place in daylight. I started feeling dumb about the whole thing, or at least about how much space it still took up in my head. In April, the county posted a notice on the park office door saying they were upgrading the security system. I only saw it because I had taken the long sidewalk past the entrance on my way home. There were new cameras mounted under the concession roof. The old bullet camera above the service window was gone. A man in a county park shirt was loading tools into a van. His name patch said E. Morales. I asked him, as casually as I could, if the old cameras had been broken. He said one of them had been. I asked which one. He pointed at the spot above the concession window. That one was pointed straight down somehow. Bracket was bent. I tried to keep my face normal. "Kids?" he shrugged. "Maybe, but the weird part was the footage. I should have left it alone. I did not. What weird part?" He looked at me like he was deciding whether I was worth telling. Then he said the camera had gone black for about 20 minutes one night in February. When it came back, the audio had a bunch of walking on it. No picture, just footsteps. He laughed a little after he said it, like he had made it less strange by saying it out loud. I asked if the date was February 15th. His smile faded. He asked how I knew that. I said I thought I had been there that night because I lost my bag. He nodded slowly, then looked past me toward the fields. "Yeah," he said. "Well, the audio was messed up anyway. Probably water in the housing." I asked what he meant by messed up. He shut the van door and said he had to get to another job. But before he drove off, he said there were footsteps on the audio, and then there was a voice saying something over and over. He said nobody at the office could agree what it said. He said it sounded like a name. That evening, I told myself I was done with it. I meant it too. I walked home on the main road with cars passing and porch lights coming on in the neighborhood. I was almost at my duplex when my phone buzzed. It was a voicemail from an unknown number. The timestamp said 9:18 p.m. The message was 14 seconds long. For the first few seconds, there was only wet grass under shoes. Step, step, step. Then my own voice, low and breathless, said, "Hello?" exactly the way I had said it on the field that night. After that, there was a pause. Then another voice, very close to the microphone, said Alina's name. I was flying the drone over the state forest because the creek had flooded 2 days earlier, and I wanted to see how bad the washout was before I hiked in with my camera pack. It was a Saturday afternoon in late May, humid and cloudy, with that heavy air that made everything smell like wet bark and mud. I had parked at the North Fork trailhead outside Elkins, West Virginia, where the gravel lot sat between the road and a wall of trees. There were no other cars there, which should have made me happy because I liked having the place to myself, but the quiet felt off from the start. I had flown there before. The trail climbed a ridge, then dropped to an old logging road that ran along the creek. It was not a famous spot, just a patch of Monongahela National Forest with rhododendron, hemlock, and a few rough campsites where people left beer cans and half-burned pallets. I used the drone mostly for landscape footage. Nothing serious. It was a DJI Mini, small enough that I could toss it in the glove box, and I had gotten pretty good at skimming it over the canopy without clipping branches. That day, the sky was low and gray, no wind at ground level. The trees were still, and the air had that dead, padded feeling right before rain, even though the forecast said it would hold until evening. I almost turned around when I got out of the truck because there was no birdsong. I do not mean quiet. I mean nothing. No chickadees, no crows, no insects whining near the ditch. Just the creek somewhere down in the hollow, running fast and rough. I set the drone case on the tailgate and launched from the gravel. At first, everything was normal. The drone rose above the lot, the controller screen bright in my hands, the forest spreading out dark green and wet below it. I pushed it out over the trees, following the creek line by memory. The video feed showed broken limbs and brown water where the creek had jumped its bank. I could see the old logging road in patches, half covered with leaves and mud. I was about 600 feet out when the feed flickered. Just once. The picture jumped sideways, then settled. I looked up from the screen, but the drone was already too far to see. The controller showed good signal, strong battery, no warnings. I figured moisture was messing with the connection. It had happened before in mist. I kept flying. The drone passed over a stand of hemlocks where the canopy dipped lower. I tilted the camera down, trying to find the section of trail that usually crossed a shallow drainage. The screen showed the tops of the trees, then a gap in the branches where the creek had undercut the bank. That was when I saw the circle. It was under the trees, not above them. I remember that clearly because the drone was looking down through the canopy and the thing was below the top branches, maybe 6 or 8 feet off the ground. It was bright, but not like sunlight. The day was cloudy and there was no direct sun to reflect. It looked like a white circular object hovering in the green shade, perfectly round, with a soft edge and a brighter rim. About the size of a kiddie pool, maybe smaller. Hard to judge through leaves. I stopped the drone without thinking. The circle stayed there on the screen. For a second or two, I thought it was a piece of trash caught in a tree. A plastic barrel lid, maybe. People dumped weird stuff in those woods. But it was not lying at an angle or snagged on branches. It was level, flat, and clean. It also looked like it was giving off light instead of reflecting it. The wet leaves around it were pale on the underside, like they were lit from below. I leaned closer to the controller. The feed broke up again. Green blocks smeared across the screen. Then the picture cleared, and the circle was still there. I took a screenshot. At least I thought I did. My thumb hit the button on the controller, and the little camera icon flashed. I started recording too, because my first feeling was not fear. It was that practical panic of seeing something rare and trying not to miss it. The drone hovered at about 180 feet above takeoff, maybe 70 or 80 feet over the canopy at that part of the hollow. I lowered it slowly. The circle did not move. The closer I got, the worse the signal became. The controller gave a weak transmission warning, then cleared. I could see the tops of the branches coming up in the frame. The circular thing was partly blocked now by leaves, but it was still visible through gaps. It did not sway. It did not spin. There were no cables, no pole, no person standing near it. Then the video feed froze. The image locked on the bright circle under the hemlocks. The timer kept running. The drone telemetry still updated. Battery 72%, height 154 feet, distance 628 feet. But the image did not move. Leaves that should have shifted with the drone stayed frozen. The circle stayed frozen too. I let go of the sticks. The controller started beeping because the drone was descending on its own. I had not told it to. The height number dropped from 154 to 153, then 151, then 148. The frozen picture on the screen remained the same. I pushed the left stick up. Nothing happened for half a second. Then the drone responded and climbed 2 feet. The feed snapped back to live video. The circle was gone. The camera showed only branches, wet leaves, and the dark gap of the creek below. I rotated slowly, panned left and right, tilted the camera down and up. Nothing. No white object, no glow, no trash, no bright patch on the ground. I lowered the drone more carefully, staying above the highest branches. The screen showed the forest floor in pieces through the canopy. Ferns, rocks, mud, a fallen tree with its roots sticking up. No circular thing anywhere. That was when I noticed the creek sound had stopped. I was standing by my truck, not down in the hollow, so the creek had been faint anyway. But it had been there, a constant rush under the silence. Now I heard only the soft electric fan noise from the controller and my own breathing. The whole forest felt muted. Even the leaves seemed too still. I looked up from the screen. The trailhead was empty. The road was empty. The trees beyond the parking lot stood in a dark line, all of them wet and motionless. The air had gotten colder. I could feel it on my arms. My t-shirt was damp from humidity a minute before, but now the skin on my forearms had goosebumps. The controller beeped again. Compass error. Then, GPS signal weak. I had flown that exact spot a dozen times and never had GPS trouble. The drone was not under heavy cover. It was above the trees. The map on the controller spun a few degrees, then snapped back. The little arrow that showed the drone's direction turned sideways, then pointed toward me, then away. I hit return to home. Nothing happened. A message popped up, unable to initiate return to home. Aircraft orientation unavailable. I said no, 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 out loud like the drone could hear me. I switched to sport mode, then back to normal. The feed stuttered again. For one frame, maybe less, the bright circle appeared on the screen. Not under the drone this time. Closer. It filled the lower right corner of the image, partly cut off, like the drone had passed beside it. Then it was gone again. The controller said the drone was still 600 feet away. I turned slowly in place, looking toward the tree line. I could not see anything in the woods. No light. No movement. But I had the sudden feeling that the screen was not showing me where the drone actually was. That made no sense, but it settled in my stomach hard. The drone feed showed the canopy from above. The telemetry said it was hovering. The distance said 611 feet. Then from somewhere in the trees directly in front of me, I heard the drone. Not loud, just that high little buzz, like an angry mosquito with plastic wings. It sounded close, maybe 30 yards away. I looked from the woods to the screen and back again. The screen still showed trees far out over the hollow. I raised the drone straight up, watching the height increase from 149 to 170, 190, 210. The buzzing in the trees near the lot did not change. It stayed at the same volume, same spot. I almost shut the controller off. I do not know why. Some part of me thought if I killed the connection, whatever mismatch was happening would stop. But then I pictured the drone dropping into the forest and being lost, and I kept my hands on the sticks. The signal cleared. The video feed jumped to a new view. Now the drone was low over the creek, much lower than it should have been, moving sideways between tree trunks. I had not put it there. The camera was pointed forward instead of down, and the image shook slightly, like the drone was fighting tiny gusts of wind. It passed a mossy boulder I recognized from the trail. That boulder was about a quarter-mile in. I tried to climb. The drone did not respond. The feed kept sliding sideways between the trees. It should have hit a branch. It passed through gaps too narrow for it. Once the camera brushed through leaves, and instead of whipping or shaking, the leaves bent away slowly, like something had pushed them before the drone reached them. The bright circle appeared again. It was ahead now, deep in the trees, hanging over the creek. Perfectly level. White rim, duller center. The drone moved toward it without input from me. I pulled both sticks back. Nothing. I pressed pause. Nothing. I hit return to home again. The controller ignored me. The circle grew larger in the frame. The center was not flat white anymore. It had texture, faint gray swirls, like fog trapped under glass. The rim brightened and dimmed in a slow pulse. The creek below it was not moving. I could see water in the frame, but it looked stiff, caught in little ridges around the rocks. I stepped backward without realizing it and bumped into my truck's tailgate. The sound of metal against my hips seemed too loud. The controller screen flickered, and for a moment I saw my own truck from above. That stopped me completely. It was not the drone's normal view. The drone was supposedly out over the creek, facing the circle, but the screen showed the gravel lot from maybe 20 feet up. My truck sat with the tailgate down. I stood beside it, head lowered, hands on the controller. The image was gray and washed out, but it was clearly me. The angle was wrong for any camera I owned. I looked up fast. Nothing was above me. The sky was a flat gray ceiling. No drone, no bird, no aircraft. I heard the buzzing in the trees again, still in front of me. The screen went black. Then the live feed returned to the forest. The circle was gone. The drone was hovering above the canopy again, according to the image. Telemetry was normal. GPS strong. Distance 604 feet, height 193 feet. Battery 64%. A green prompt appeared like nothing had happened. Home point updated. I did not update the home point. I turned the drone around manually and brought it back. It obeyed perfectly now. The video feed stayed clean. The forest looked normal from above, wet and empty and dark. I kept expecting the circle to appear between branches again, but there was nothing. When the drone came into view above the parking lot, I felt stupidly relieved. It buzzed down like any other drone, little gray body against the clouds. I landed it on the gravel and picked it up. It was warm, not battery warm. The whole plastic shell was warm, including the arms and prop guards. A damp gray film covered the underside. I wiped it with my thumb and it came away like fine ash mixed with water. It had no smell at first, but when it dried on my skin, it smelled faintly like burnt dust. I powered everything off and sat in the driver's seat with the door open. My hands were shaking. I checked the controller recordings right away. The screenshot was there, but it did not show the circle. It showed the forest canopy, blurry from movement, with a gap between branches where the circle should have been. The leaves around the gap were lit from below, pale and sharp, but the object itself was missing. The video clip was the same. At the moment, I remembered seeing the circle clearly. The footage showed only dark green leaves and that impossible underlighting. Then the feed froze, but in the recorded file, it did not freeze. The drone kept moving normally. It never descended. It never went low over the creek. It never showed the boulder. It never showed my truck from above. The recording from the whole flight looked like a boring pass over the forest. Except for the audio. The drone did not record audio, but the screen recording from my phone did because I had started a screen capture when the first glitch happened. Mostly it captured my breathing, the controller beeps, and me muttering. During the part where the video showed normal canopy, there was another sound underneath, a low repeating tone, like someone humming through a wall. It came in pulses. Every time the tone pulsed, the trees in the video brightened slightly from below. I sat there for a while, watching that section over and over. Then I noticed the time. I had launched at 3:17 p.m. The flight log said I landed at 3:31 p.m. The clock on my truck said 4:08. My phone said 4:08 too. I was missing more than half an hour. I checked the drone battery, thinking maybe the log was wrong. It had 61% left, which matched a short flight. If it had been in the air for 50 minutes, it should have been dead or close to it. The controller battery had barely dropped. The phone was the same. Everything agreed except the actual world. That was when I decided to leave. I packed too fast and dropped one of the spare props into the gravel. I left it there. I closed the tailgate, got in the truck, and backed out of the lot without putting my seatbelt on. I did not want to look at the trees, but I kept glancing at them anyway. Nothing moved in there. No glow. No buzz. Just dark trunks and thick leaves. The road back toward Elkins had no service for the first few miles. I drove with the radio off. My ears felt plugged, like I had been on a plane, and my right hand still smelled like burnt dust even after I wiped it on my jeans. About 10 minutes from town, I passed a Forest Service truck parked on the shoulder. A guy in a green uniform stood near the ditch, looking into the woods with binoculars. I almost stopped and told him, but I did not. I slowed down though, and he turned his head as I passed. He was not looking at me. He was looking above my truck. I checked the mirror. There was nothing behind me but the road and low clouds. When I got home, my roommate Caleb was on the porch trying to fix a loose board with a cordless drill. He said, "You're back late." And I said the trail was washed out worse than I thought. He asked if I got any footage. I said not really. I took the drone straight to my room. Under the desk lamp, The gray film on the underside had dried into tiny specks. I scraped some onto a piece of white paper with a knife. It looked like ash, but felt gritty, almost metallic. I put the paper in a plastic bag because I did not know what else to do. The drone's camera lens had a faint ring on it too, a perfect circle near the edge of the glass. Lens cleaner would not remove it. That night, I opened the flight log on my laptop. The map showed the drone flying out over the forest, hovering for 4 minutes, then returning. Nothing strange, but when I exported the coordinates and loaded them into a satellite map, the hover point was not over the creek where I had seen the circle. It was over an area of forest about 200 yards north, near a clearing I had never noticed before. The clearing did not show in the live feed. I zoomed in on the satellite image. It was small, maybe 40 feet across, a rough circle of lighter vegetation surrounded by hemlocks. There was no trail leading to it. No road, no structure. I went to bed late and did not sleep much. Around 2 a.m., my phone lit up on the nightstand. It was a notification from the drone app. Aircraft disconnected. The drone was in its case under my desk. The battery was removed. The controller was turned off. I stared at the notification until the screen went dark. In the morning, I checked the app. There was a new flight record from 2:03 a.m. It lasted 17 seconds. No GPS data, no distance, no altitude, just a blank map and a thumbnail image. The thumbnail was black except for a bright white circle near the center. I clicked it. The file would not open. I told Caleb then, or tried to. I showed him the flight log, the weird underlit trees, the thumbnail that would not open, and the ring on the drone lens. He listened longer than I expected, then asked if somebody could have hacked the drone. I said maybe. That answer made him more comfortable, so he stayed with it. He said people hacked stuff all the time. He said drones were glitchy. He said the circle was probably a campsite tarp or a reflection off water, and the missing time was probably me losing track because I was focused on the screen. I nodded because I wanted those things to be true. But he stopped talking when I showed him the ash. The little plastic bag was still on my desk. The gray specks had gathered into a thin ring, even though I had shaken them loose when I carried the bag. I flattened the bag with my palm, spreading the specks out. Then I left it on the desk while we watched. Slowly, not all at once, the specks pulled back toward the same circular shape. Caleb said, "That's static." I said, "Probably." Neither of us touched the bag after that. 2 days later, I went back with my friend Priya because she was the only person I knew who would not immediately turn it into a joke. Priya taught biology at the community college and hiked alone more than anyone I knew. I did not tell her the whole story before we went. I just said I had seen something odd on drone footage and wanted to check a clearing. It was sunny that morning, clear after the rain, with steam coming off the road in places. The trailhead lot had 2 cars in it this time. We saw a couple with trekking poles heading up the ridge, which made me feel better. Normal people. Normal day. I left the drone at home. We hiked in on the main trail, then cut off where the map said the clearing should be. There was no path. We pushed through rhododendron and wet ferns, climbing over slick logs and ducking under branches. The forest made normal sounds that day. Birds, bugs, the creek below. I kept telling myself that mattered. The clearing was real. It was not a campsite. It was a round patch where the trees simply stopped. No stump bases, no cut logs. Just a circle of low grass and moss under open sky, maybe 30 feet wide. The ground in the middle was flat and darker than the rest, as if water had stood there recently, but it was not muddy. It gave slightly under my boots, like thick carpet. Priya crouched and touched the moss. She did not say anything for a while. Around the edge of the clearing, the hemlock branches all bent inward, not broken, bent. Their tips pointed toward the center, like they had grown that way, except the satellite photo I checked later from the year before showed a normal, unbroken canopy there. Whatever happened had happened recently. In the center of the clearing, half hidden in the moss, I found one of my spare props, the one I had dropped in the gravel lot. It was black plastic with the same little silver nick on the tip from when I clipped my garage door the previous winter. I knew it was mine. It had no mud on it, no scratches from being carried through the woods. It was lying flat, warm from the sun. Priya looked at me and said, "You dropped this here?" I said no. She asked where. I said the parking lot. We left after that. Not running, not panicked, just done. I put the prop in my pocket and kept checking behind us on the hike out. Once I thought I heard the drone buzz somewhere above the trees, but Priya said it was a cicada. Maybe it was. I wanted it to be. When we got back to the lot, the 2 cars were gone. My truck was alone. On the windshield, there was a wet circular mark about the size of a dinner plate, right in front of the driver's seat. It looked like condensation, except it was on the outside of the glass, and the rest of the windshield was dry. I wiped it with my sleeve. It left a gray smear. Priya saw that too. She did not offer an explanation. She just got in the passenger seat and told me to drive. I did make it home. I cleaned the drone, boxed it up, and put it in the closet. I did not fly again for months. Eventually, I sold it online to a guy in Ohio and did not mention the lens ring because it did not seem to affect the video anymore. Before I shipped it, I checked the app one last time to clear my account. There was one new file in the cache. No date, no location, just a thumbnail. It showed the forest clearing from above at night. The trees formed a dark circle around pale grass. In the center, a bright white ring hovered just above the ground. Near the edge of the clearing, 2 small figures stood shoulder to shoulder looking up. One wore my blue rain jacket. The other wore Priya's orange day pack. I first noticed the compass problem on a hot Wednesday morning, out past Cocker City, Kansas, on a soybean farm that belonged to the Ehlers family. I was doing boundary work for a drainage easement. Nothing interesting. The county wanted updated maps before they approved a culvert project, and my boss, Marla, sent me because everyone else was tied up on construction staking jobs closer to Salina. It was one of those late August mornings where the sun was already mean by 9. No clouds, no wind, just flat fields and heat coming off the dirt. The air smelled like cut weeds, fertilizer, and diesel from the tractor that had passed me earlier. I had parked my work truck near a rusted gate on Road 734 and walked in with the GPS rover, tripod, flagging tape, and a regular handheld compass I kept in my vest, even though I barely used it anymore. The land was simple enough on paper. A rectangle of cropland bordered by a shallow drainage ditch to the south and an old shelter belt to the west. The weird part was a circular patch near the middle of the north field. It showed up on the aerial images as a pale disc in the beans, about 60 feet across, maybe a little more. I figured it was old equipment damage or a spot where the soil went bad. Farmers had a million reasons for odd patches. The owner, Wade Ehlers, met me at the gate. He was in his 60s, sunburned, with white hair under a seed company cap. His son Nolan stood beside him, leaning on the bed of a pickup, chewing on a plastic coffee stirrer. Wade shook my hand and told me where the property pins should be, then pointed toward the north field. "Don't need anything from in there, do you?" he asked. I looked where he pointed. The pale circle was visible even from the gate, a perfect round place in the beans where the plants were shorter and duller. I said I might need to shoot a couple points through there, depending on the line. Wade glanced at Nolan. Nolan looked away toward the road. Wade said, "You can go around it." I laughed a little because I thought he was joking. GPS doesn't care much, but I need clean line of sight. If it saves time, I'll cut across. He did not laugh. He said, "Just go around it if you can." That was the first thing that stuck with me. Farmers were usually practical. If they wanted you to avoid something, they told you why. Wet spot, badger hole, old well, bull in the pasture. Wade did not give a reason, and Nolan acted like he wished his dad had not said anything. I said okay, and started work. The first couple hours were normal. I found the corner monuments, flagged the ditch line, took shots along the proposed easement, and sweated through my shirt. The GPS worked fine. My tablet drew the field shape as expected. I could hear meadowlarks somewhere out beyond the soybeans and an irrigation pump running far off to the east. By late morning, I needed one cross-check point near the center of the field to tie the easement to an old fence reference. I could have walked around the pale circle like Wade asked, but it was hot and the beans were thick, and going around meant fighting through another 100 yards of crop. The circle was dry-looking and open. The plants there barely reached my knees. I told myself Wade probably just did not like people stepping in it because the crop was weak, so I walked toward it. The first strange thing was the silence. It did not drop all at once. I noticed it while checking the rover height. The pump sound faded. The insects faded. Even the dry rustling of leaves around my legs seemed muffled. I stopped about 10 feet from the edge of the pale circle and looked back toward the gate. The trucks were still there. Wade and Nolan were gone, maybe back to the house. Heat shimmered over the road. Everything looked normal. The circle looked less normal up close. It was too clean. The soybean plants changed right at the edge, like someone had drawn a line with a compass. Outside the circle, the plants were waist-high and dark green. Inside, they were shorter, dusty, gray-green, and all leaned slightly outward away from the center. The soil inside was smoother too. Not bare, but packed down in a way that did not match tractor tracks or water flow. I stepped in. My GPS rover lost lock immediately. The tablet beeped and flashed a red warning. Insufficient satellites. I looked up, annoyed. Clear blue sky, no trees overhead, no buildings. Nothing that should have blocked signal. I took one step back out of the circle, and the signal came back. 15 satellites. Fixed solution. I stepped in again, lost lock. That was weird, but GPS glitches happen. I had seen multipath from grain bins, interference from power lines, all kinds of stupid stuff. There were no grain bins nearby and no lines over the field, but I still tried to explain it away. I set the rover down at the edge and pulled out the handheld compass, mostly out of habit. The needle spun once, stopped, then pointed east. I turned my body. It stayed pointed east relative to me, not relative to the ground. I frowned, tapped the case, and held it level. The needle swung north, then southeast, then west. It did not wobble like a weak magnet. It snapped from one direction to another like it was choosing. I had a second compass clipped to my field bag, a cheap backup I used for rough notes. I pulled that one out. It pointed straight behind me. The first compass pointed left. I held them side by side. They disagreed by almost 90 degrees. That made the sweat on my back feel cold for a second. I walked a few steps deeper into the circle, holding one compass in each hand. The needles shifted with every step. Sometimes they pointed at each other. Sometimes they pointed away. At the center, the first compass settled toward the shelter belt. The second pointed toward the ditch. My phone compass, when I opened it, spun in a slow circle and then froze at 000 degrees no matter which way I turned. I laughed once because the whole thing felt too dumb to be scary yet. "Great," I said out loud. "That's helpful." My voice sounded flat. I put the phone away and looked around. The field outside the circle seemed farther away than it had a minute before, not visually. It was still 60 feet across. But the green wall of beans at the edge looked like a boundary, like I was standing inside a shallow, invisible room. Then the tripod fell over. It was not inside the circle. I had left it 10 feet outside with the rover attached. There was no wind. It just tipped slowly, like someone had leaned a hand on it and dropped into the beans. The tablet on the pole gave one long beep. I walked out fast and picked it up. The second I crossed the edge, all the normal sounds returned. Insects, pump, leaves, distant truck on gravel. The GPS reconnected. The tablet showed the exact coordinate point I'd been trying to shoot. But the elevation was wrong. It said the rover had been at 4,112 feet. That field was around 1,500 feet above sea level. I stared at the number until it corrected itself. I should have left it alone. I knew that even then. But I was a surveyor. Weird measurements bothered me in a way that felt personal. I wanted repeatability. I wanted to know if the instruments were failing or if something in that circle was messing with them. So I took out a can of orange marking paint and sprayed a line at the edge where the GPS lost lock. Then I walked around the circle, checking every few feet. It was perfect, not almost perfect. Perfect enough that my rough pacing kept hitting the same distance from center. The GPS dropped at the boundary every time, right at the change in crop height. The compass behavior changed there too. Outside, north was north. Inside, north depended on which compass you asked and where you stood. About halfway around, I found 3 old survey flags tied to the beans. They were not mine. The plastic had faded from pink to almost white. The wire stems were rusted. They had been pushed low into the dirt, like someone tried to hide them. One still had black writing on the tape, but the sun had eaten most of it. I could make out a date from years earlier and the name H. Klein. I knew that name. Harvey Klein had surveyed in that part of Kansas before he retired. Marla had mentioned him. Old school guy, good notes, terrible handwriting. I took a picture of the flag and kept walking. When I came back near the north edge, Wade was standing by the field. He had not driven up. At least I had not heard him. He stood at the crop edge with his hands on his hips, hat pulled low, watching me. I waved and tried to act casual. He did not wave back. When I got close, he said, "I told you to go around." I said, "Yeah, sorry. I needed to check the equipment. Something's throwing off the compass in there." He looked at the circle, but not into it. His eyes stayed on the plants at the edge. "Compass won't work," he said. "Do you know why?" "No." He said it too. I mentioned the GPS losing signal, the elevation glitch, the old flags. He listened without changing expression. When I said Harvey Klein's name, Wade's jaw moved like he was biting down on something. "He came out here?" I asked. Wade took his hat off, wiped his forehead, put it back on. "Long time ago." "For survey work?" "For the county." "What was he checking?" Wade looked toward the house. It was a low white farmhouse about half a mile away, with grain bins and cottonwoods around it. "You don't need that point. Mark it from outside." I said I could do that, but I needed to note any magnetic interference or possible obstruction. He said, "Don't write about it." I thought I misheard him. "What?" "Just do your map." I was tired and hot, and his tone rubbed me wrong. "I can't ignore equipment failure on a survey." He stepped closer then, not aggressive exactly, but firm. "You can write bad GPS, you can write whatever keeps your boss happy. Don't write about the spot." Before I could answer, Nolan drove up in the pickup and stopped hard enough that dust rolled over the beans. He got out and looked from me to Wade. "Dad," he said. Wade did not look away from me. "He's asking." Nolan swore under his breath. Then he told me there was an old well somewhere out there and they did not want liability. That was obviously not true. I said, "Then show me where the well is and I'll mark it." Neither of them answered. A few seconds passed with the pump running in the distance and sweat dripping down my neck. Finally, Nolan said, "Just don't stand in the middle after noon." I asked why noon mattered. He looked at his father like he had already said too much. Wade told me to finish up and leave the invoice with the office. They drove off together. I checked the time. 11:37. I should have packed up then. Instead, I stayed outside the circle and took more shots from the boundary. I told myself it was work. Really, I was waiting for noon because Nolan had made the mistake of giving me a specific time, and now I needed to know what changed. The heat got worse. The sky stayed empty. A grasshopper clicked somewhere near my boot, and even that sound made me jump because I was paying too much attention to everything. I ate half a crushed granola bar and drank warm water from my bottle. At 11:58, the GPS tablet froze. It was sitting on the tailgate of my truck by then, well outside the field, and the screen just locked on the map. I tapped it. Nothing. The rover started beeping from its case, a slow warning tone I had never heard before. My phone lost service. Not unusual in the country, but the timing bothered me. At 12, the soybeans inside the circle stopped moving. There was a light breeze by then. The plants outside the circle rustled softly. The plants inside held still, every leaf, every stem. It was like the air inside the circle had turned thick. Then all three compasses in my vest pocket started ticking. I do not mean clicking like electronics. They were simple magnetic compasses. But the needles were snapping back and forth hard enough to tap the plastic housings. I pulled one out with 2 fingers. The needle spun, stopped, spun the other way, then pointed straight down. The whole compass tilted in my palm like it was being pulled. A sound came from the center of the circle. Low. Steady. Not loud enough to cover the pump, but somehow under everything. I felt it in my teeth more than my ears. The soil at the center darkened. It happened slowly, spreading outward in a round patch about the size of a truck tire. The dirt did not crack or sink. It just turned a deeper brown like water was rising from underneath. But the day was dry and the surface stayed dusty. I stood there at the edge, telling myself to record it. My phone camera opened, but the screen showed only a black rectangle. Not the app. The app was visible. The image from the camera was black. I turned around and pointed it at my truck. Black. I closed it, reopened it. Same thing. Then something reflected in the black screen. Behind me. I turned fast. Nothing stood there, just the field, the road, and my truck. But for that 1 second in the dead phone screen, I had seen a pale vertical shape at the edge of the circle. tall and narrow. Not a person exactly, more like a strip of light standing upright. The tone deepened. The beams inside the circle leaned farther outward. I backed up a step. At the center, something bright appeared just above the soil. A small white point at first. I thought it was sunlight off glass, but the sun was directly overhead and there was no glass. The point widened into a thin ring about a foot across, lying flat in the air a few inches above the ground. It was not solid. I could see the dark soil through the middle. The edge was bright enough that my eyes watered. It made no beam, no heat, no shadow. The ring grew slowly. 2 feet, 4 feet, maybe 6. Every compass needle in my pocket started tapping so fast it sounded like insects in plastic boxes. The GPS rover in the case beeped louder. My truck's horn chirped once, then the doors locked by themselves. I stepped back again and almost fell into the beams. The ring lifted. Not high, maybe to knee height. It stayed level and perfectly round, hovering over the center of the circle. The air around it had a slight shimmer, like heat above pavement, but the temperature where I stood dropped fast enough that sweat went cold on my shirt. Then I heard voices. Not clear words. More like people talking in another room with a fan running. They seemed to come from the circle, from the rings, from the field itself. I heard a man's voice, then a woman's, then a sound like someone laughing once and stopping abruptly. It was ordinary enough to be worse than a strange sound would have been. The ring dimmed. For a moment I could see something inside it, not through it. A gray shape, flat and distant, like a view of a road seen from very high up. Then the image shifted, and I saw a line of fence posts, but not the fence near me. These posts stood in snow. The sky beyond them was dark blue. Then that was gone too, and the ring returned to plain white. The tablet on my tailgate came back to life and started speaking directions. It was not connected to any route app. It just said, in the default navigation voice, proceed north for 300 feet. The voice repeated it, proceed north for 300 feet. North, according to every compass I had, was currently nowhere. I grabbed the tablet and shut it off. The screen went dark, then lit again with a blank map. A single dot showed in the middle of the field, pulsing at the center of the circle. The elevation read 4,212 feet again. The ring folded. That sounds too strange, but it is what I saw. It did not collapse or vanish. One side lifted and passed over the other like a soap bubble being turned inside out, except it stayed bright and sharp. For a second, it was no longer a ring. It was a thin vertical line of light standing in the center of the soybeans. The pale shape I had seen in the phone reflection appeared beside it. I did not see it walk in. It was just there. Tall, narrow, featureless. Not glowing exactly, more like it was made of the same washed-out brightness as the line, but duller. It stood partly sideways to me, if sideways meant anything. It had no arms I could make out, no face, no head shape that made sense. Just an upright absence in the air, a person-sized place where the field looked overexposed. I could not move. The thing turned toward me. At least I thought it did. The brightness shifted, and suddenly I felt looked at. That was the only way to describe it. My eyes blurred. The tone rose until it felt like pressure behind my nose. The tablet in my hand vibrated hard enough that I dropped it. Then the line of light went out. The shape went out with it. The field sounds came back all at once. Pump, insects, leaves, a truck on the gravel road. My ears popped and I stumbled backward, breathing like I had run a mile. The soybeans inside the circle moved again, all of them rustling outward in the light breeze. The center of the circle was empty. The whole thing had lasted maybe a minute. My watch said 12:48. I had lost almost 50 minutes. I know I had not stood there for 50 minutes staring. My water bottle was still on the tailgate, and the ice inside had not melted much. The granola wrapper I had dropped near my boot was still there. The sun had shifted enough that the truck's shadow sat in a different place. The GPS tablet, lying screen up in the dirt, showed a completed point in the center of the circle. I had not taken that shot. The point name was H. Klein 07. I picked it up with shaking hands. The coordinate was filled in. Elevation 4,212 feet. Note field blank. I packed everything without looking at the circle again. The truck doors were locked and my key fob did not work at first. When it finally opened, the cab smelled like hot dust and old pennies. The radio display said 12, even though the truck clock had been correct that morning. My phone had service again, with 3 missed calls from Marla. I called her while driving back toward town. She asked why I had sent a file already. I said I had not sent anything. She said the data collector synced a job at 12:41. It had one point in it that looked bad, way off elevation, and she wanted to know if the rover had glitched. I told her yes. I told her there was interference in the field and I was coming back. She started asking normal work questions, and I could not answer them. My mouth was dry. I kept looking in the rearview mirror at the dust behind the truck. Once, in the shimmer above the road, I thought I saw a pale vertical shape standing between the ruts. When I blinked, it was just a road sign. Back at the office, Marla pulled the file up on the big monitor. The point was there. H. Klein score row 7. It was not just bad elevation. The horizontal position put it in the field, but the metadata said it had been collected from a base station in Colorado. We did not use any Colorado base stations. The receiver serial number was mine, but the antenna height was wrong. The timestamp was 12:41 exactly. Marla looked at me. I must have looked bad because she stopped being annoyed. I told her the GPS had trouble and that I needed to check old records before drafting the map. I did not tell her about the ring or the shape. Not then. That evening, I searched our archive jobs for Harvey Klein. It took me an hour because the old files were scanned badly. I found one job from 1998 for the same Ehlers property. The notes were handwritten. Most of it was standard boundary stuff. Then on one page, Klein had drawn a circle in the middle of the field and written, "Needle fail, all bearings local only." Below that, in shaky block letters, he had written, "Do not occupy after 1200. I stared at that until the office lights clicked off on their timer and left me sitting in the dark. I went back the next morning because Marla told me we needed clean data and because a part of me wanted to see it in daylight again with nothing happening. She offered to send Dylan with me, but I said no too quickly. I did not want anyone else standing near that thing. Wade Ehlers was waiting by the gate when I arrived. He knew. I could tell by his face. He looked older than the day before, like he had not slept. Nolan stood by the pickup, arms crossed. Wade said, "You saw it." I did not answer. He looked at the field. The pale circle was there, dull in the morning sun. My dad said it used to be smaller. I asked him what it was. He shook his head. A place. That was all he would say. Nolan told me his grandfather had lost 2 cows in that field in the 70s. Not disappeared, he said, because they found them the next day. They were standing in the circle, alive, but every metal tag on them had twisted around backward, and both animals refused to cross that patch again. After that, the family just farmed around it as best they could. Every few years, someone from the county or a utility company ignored the warnings. Bad equipment, dead batteries, watches wrong. One man walked out crying and never sent a bill. I asked about Harvey Klein. Wade said Harvey had stood in the circle at noon because he thought everyone was being superstitious. Afterward, he kept calling Wade's father for months, asking if they had found a fence line in snow. There was no fence line in snow anywhere on that farm. I did not know what to say to that. We finished the survey without entering the circle. I used offsets, took redundant shots, and wrote the blandest note I could. Localized instrument interference observed in crop anomaly. Marla accepted it because the boundary closed and the easement map worked. Before I left, Wade walked me back to my truck. He said, "Don't keep anything from out there." I told him I did not take anything. He looked at my vest. I checked the pockets. In the lower pocket where I kept flagging tape and paint caps, there was one of the old faded survey flags, the Harvey Klein flag. I had not picked it up. I was sure of that. The wire stem was bent into a smooth circle, and the faded tape had a fresh black mark across it, a single straight line. Wade took it from me and carried it to the drainage ditch without another word. He pushed it deep into the mud with his boot. I drove home that afternoon and showered for a long time. My compass, the good one, sat on the bathroom counter because I had emptied my vest. While I was brushing my teeth, the needle turned slowly until it pointed at me. Not north. Me. I moved to the left. It followed. I moved to the right. It followed again. I put it in the kitchen junk drawer and shut it. The next morning, it was on my nightstand. The needle pointed toward the open bedroom door, steady and patient, like it was waiting for me to follow. The fog sat low over Skagit Bay that morning, low enough that the tops of the cattails looked like they were floating without stems. I had parked at the pullout off Fur Island Road a little after 6, before the first birders showed up with coffee cups and tripods. It was early November, cold but not freezing, and the whole marsh had that flat gray look where you could not tell where the water ended and the sky started. I was there for short-eared owls mostly. I had seen one hunting the ditch line the week before, and I wanted clean footage of it, quartering over the grass. I had my long lens on the tripod, my old Canon hanging from the strap, and a pair of Vortex binoculars tucked inside my jacket so they would not fog up. My friend Lena was supposed to meet me around 7, but she texted while I was still sitting in the truck and said her kid had a fever. I almost turned around then because the light was bad and the fog kept thickening, but I had already driven 40 minutes from Mount Vernon, so I stayed. For the first half hour, nothing much happened. A few red-winged blackbirds moved around in the reeds. 2 herons lifted out of a drainage channel and vanished like gray paper cutouts. Somewhere out on the flats, snow geese made that distant barking sound they make before they rise, but I could not see them. I set up near a fence post and started filming a bald eagle sitting on a dead snag across the water. That was when I noticed the glow. It was not bright at first. It was just a small warm dot about the color of a porch light seen from far away. It hung low over the marsh, maybe a few feet above the fog, though distance was hard to judge. I first assumed it was a truck on the dike road, headlights turned sideways in the mist. Then it moved left without getting closer or farther away in a smooth line that did not match the road. I lowered the camera and stared with my eyes. I could still see it, faint but steady. I brought up the binoculars, wiped one lens with my sleeve, and found it again between 2 clumps of willow. Through the binoculars it looked stranger. It was not a round light exactly. It had a hard edge on one side and a blurred edge on the other, like something was glowing from behind a thin piece of plastic. It was not huge. If it had been near the far drainage ditch, maybe it was the size of a basketball. If it had been farther out, it could have been anything. I could not hear an engine, and I could not see a pole or building or vehicle near it. I watched it for a few minutes, waiting for the obvious answer to show itself. The fog shifted around it. The light did not blink. It drifted sideways again, slow and careful, and then stopped. A flock of dunlin came over the mudflat in a tight little cloud and turned all at once, the way shorebirds do, flashing pale and dark. When they crossed near the light, they split around it. That got my attention more than the light itself. I put the binoculars down and looked through the camera. The eagle was still in frame, sitting on the snag, facing the bay. I loosened the tripod head and panned toward where I thought the light was. On the camera screen, I could not see it. I zoomed in digitally and adjusted exposure, but the screen showed only fog and reeds and a few blackbirds clinging to stems. I thought I had lost it, but when I looked through the binoculars again, it was still there. I remember saying, "What are you?" out loud. My voice sounded small, like the fog had swallowed most of it. For the next hour, I followed it. That sounds ridiculous when I say it, because I did not physically follow it far. I stayed mostly near the same ditch bank, moving only 20 or 30 yards at a time when the reeds blocked my view. But my attention followed it completely. I tracked it through the binoculars until my arms ached and my eyes watered from the cold. It never moved fast. That was the unsettling part. It behaved like it had all the time in the world. It would glide 10 feet to the right, stop, sink a little, rise back to the same height, then hold there. Once it dimmed until I thought it was gone, but then it brightened again in the same spot. A couple of times, it seemed to pass behind reeds that were much closer to me, which made it feel small and near, but then it would appear beyond a row of fence posts half a mile away, which made no sense. The birds reacted before I did. A northern harrier came low over the grass from my left, hunting. It was moving in its normal lazy way, wings tipped up. When it reached the line where the glow had been drifting, it jerked higher, flapped hard twice, and turned back the exact way it came. I had seen harriers spook before, usually from dogs or people, but this looked like it had hit a wall it did not want to cross. The blackbirds near me went quiet after that. Not flew away, not alarm called, just quiet. They stayed in the cattails, little dark shapes with hunched shoulders, all facing the same direction. I tried filming again. I set the camera to manual focus, pointed it exactly where I saw the glow, and recorded several minutes. I kept checking between the binoculars and the camera screen. In the binoculars, the light was there, sometimes bright enough that I expected it to blow out the image. On the camera screen, nothing. Just fog. I thought maybe the sensor was not picking up whatever wavelength it was, which sounded stupid even inside my own head. I took still photos too, bracketed the exposure, changed ISO, even took the UV filter off the lens in case it was causing some reflection. Nothing showed on the screen. Around 7:30, the fog got thicker. The road behind me disappeared. I could hear cars passing, tires hissing on wet pavement, but I could not see them. I started feeling cut off from everything. The marsh was not remote. There were houses and farms all around Fur Island, and I was probably 5 minutes from someone's kitchen table. But in that fog, standing next to the ditch with no one around, it felt like I had walked into a separate place. The light shifted toward the bay. I followed it with the binoculars, stepping over flattened grass and trying not to slip. My boots sank into mud near the edge of the ditch. I could smell rotting vegetation and salt water. At one point, I looked down to make sure I was not about to step into the water, and when I looked back up, the light was much closer. It was on my side of the far channel now. I was sure of that. It hung beyond a patch of rose hips, maybe 70 yards away, about shoulder high. I could see the wet red berries in front of it, dark against the glow. It had more shape from that distance, not an orb, not a flame, more like a short vertical smear. The top was squared off. The bottom narrowed slightly, like a reflection hanging in the air without a surface. I stopped moving. There was a sound then, very low, not loud, more felt than heard. It was like when a big truck idled somewhere nearby, except there was no vibration in the ground and no rise and fall like an engine. Just a steady pressure in my ears. I swallowed and my left ear popped. The sound stopped right away. Every bird I could see turned toward the light. I noticed it first with the blackbirds. Then the eagle on the snag, which I had forgotten about, had turned too. The herons in the drainage channel stood stiff with their necks pulled in, all facing the same place. Even the gulls sitting out on the mud seemed lined up. It was not dramatic. They were not panicking. They were just watching. That was the moment I got scared in a practical way. Not movie scared. More like my body decided before my mind did. My hands started shaking enough that the binoculars tapped against my glasses. I lowered them and looked around for another person. A dog walker, a farmer, anyone. There was no one. The fog made the road sound farther away than it was. I backed up a few steps. The light did not move. It stayed above the rose hips, clean and warm and perfectly quiet. I remember thinking that if it had been blue or green, I might have handled it better. Warm yellow made it worse somehow. It looked like something familiar, pretending to be ordinary. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I nearly dropped the binoculars. It was a message from Lena asking if the owls were out. The timestamp said 8:12. I stared at it for a second because I thought the phone was wrong. It had been around 7:30 only a few minutes before. I checked my camera. The clock on the camera said 8:11. I looked at my watch, the cheap digital one I wore because I hated using my phone with gloves. 8:12. I did not remember 40 minutes passing. I knew I had been watching the light for a while, but not that long. My legs were stiff and my hands were numb, and my coffee in the truck was probably cold. Still, I could not place the missing stretch. I had not blacked out, I had not felt dizzy. There was just a blank spot where there should have been a sequence of things. The light began to move again. It slid to the right behind the rose hips. For a few seconds it vanished behind the branches, then appeared on the other side much lower, close to the ground. The birds followed it with their heads. I could see the eagle's white head turn on the snag like a weather vane. The blackbirds shifted on their reeds, little claws gripping, bodies pointed one way and heads another. I forced myself to lift the camera and record. I did not expect the light to show, but I wanted the birds, wanted something. The lens hunted for focus in the fog, so I switched to manual and set it on the rose hips. My fingers felt clumsy. I recorded a long clip, maybe 8 or 9 minutes, while the light moved behind the brush, and out toward the open flats again. Then it stopped. The fog in front of it seemed to pull inward. I do not know how else to describe it. It was not like wind because the reeds did not bend and my jacket did not move. The fog just thinned in a narrow column around the glow, then thickened again. The light dimmed once, twice, and then went out. Not faded. Went out. The birds kept staring at the same empty place. I waited. I do not know why. Part of me expected it to come back, and part of me did not want to turn my back on where it had been. I counted to 60 in my head. Then I counted again. Nothing changed. The fog closed over the spot, and the marsh slowly started making normal sounds again. One blackbird called. A gull shifted its wings. Somewhere a goose honked once like it was testing the air. I packed up too fast and badly. I forgot to collapse one tripod leg and nearly threw the whole thing into the ditch. The camera strap got tangled with the binocular strap. My hands would not work right. I kept glancing over my shoulder toward the rose hips and that flat gray patch beyond them. On the way back to the truck, I saw footprints in the mud beside mine. They were not human footprints. I am not saying they were strange in that way. They were bird tracks, probably heron or goose, long toes pressed into the mud. What bothered me was that they made a clean semicircle around the spot where I had been standing, like several birds had walked close to me while I was watching the light. I had not heard wings, splashing, anything. The prints were fresh enough that water still shone in them. I got in the truck and locked the doors, which felt silly the second I did it. The fog had beaded all over the windshield. I sat there with the heater running, looking at the blank wall of gray beyond the hood. I texted Lena that something weird happened and I was heading home. She sent back a question mark and then asked if I was okay. I said yes, because I was not hurt and because I did not want to type it out in a parking pullout with the marsh right there. I drove home slower than normal. The road across Fur Island was empty in that fog, just mailboxes and ditches appearing one at a time. Twice I thought I saw the warm glow off to my right, between barns or above fields, but both times it was just a house light or a reflector catching my headlights. At least I thought so. I kept my radio off. Every little rattle in the truck sounded louder than it should have. When I got home, my wife, Maribel, was making toast. She asked why I was back so early, then saw my face and turned the toaster lever up like she had forgotten about breakfast. I told her I saw a weird light in the marsh. I tried to say it casually. It came out flat and awkward. She asked if it was a drone. That was the first normal explanation I grabbed onto. A drone made sense in some ways. People flew them everywhere now. Maybe it had lights. Maybe the fog distorted it. Maybe the birds had reacted to the sound, even if I could not hear the rotors. But the missing time did not fit. The lack of footage did not fit. And I had tracked birds for years. I knew how birds reacted to drones. They usually flushed or scattered, especially shorebirds. They did not sit still and stare. I set the camera on the kitchen table and pulled the card. Maribel stood behind me while I loaded the files onto my laptop. There were the early clips: eagle on snag, blackbirds and cattails, fog rolling over the flats. Then the first attempt at filming the light. I opened it full screen. Nothing was there. I had expected that, but it still made my stomach drop. The frame showed reeds and fog, no glow, no blur, no lens flare, no bright spot hiding in the exposure. I scrubbed through slowly, nothing. Then Maribel touched my shoulder and said, "Look at the birds." I had been staring at the empty center of the frame. She was looking at the edges. Every blackbird in the clip was facing the same direction. I paused the video. There were maybe 20 of them visible, scattered through the cattails and brush. Some were partly hidden, some just dots, all their heads pointed toward the same empty patch of fog where the light should have been. I opened the next clip. Same thing. A heron stood in the background with its body angled left and its head turned hard right, beak aimed at nothing. The eagle on the snag was visible near the top corner, too small to matter unless you knew to look. It was staring at the same place. The longer clip, the one I took near the end, was worse. I had recorded 8 minutes and 36 seconds. The light was not visible at all. The rose hips were sharp. The fog was soft. The ditch water moved a little. The whole frame looked boring unless you watched the animals. There were more birds than I remembered. Blackbirds, 2 herons, gulls farther back, and several small birds I could not identify because they were half buried in the reeds. Every one of them held still for almost the entire clip. Not frozen exactly. Their feathers moved, one blinked, another adjusted a foot, but their heads stayed locked on the same empty spot just above the rose hips. At around the 6-minute mark, they all shifted together, not at once like a flock taking off. More like each head turned a few degrees in the same direction, following something crossing the frame. There was nothing there. The fog did not change on camera. No shadow passed. No insect crossed the lens. The birds tracked empty air from left to right for about 20 seconds. Maribel stepped back from the laptop and put one hand over her mouth. I played it again without sound, then with sound. On the audio, there was mostly wind noise and distant geese. But right before the birds shifted, there was a low tone, very faint. If I had not heard something similar in the marsh, I would have missed it. It lasted maybe 4 seconds. The laptop speakers barely caught it, so I put on headphones. The tone sat deep in my ears. It was not a hum exactly. It reminded me of pressure more than sound, like the audio had recorded a change in the room. After it ended, there was a small click from the camera microphone, and then one blackbird called. I checked the metadata next. The timestamps matched the gap I could not account for. There was a clip at 7:28, then nothing until 8:09. I had not turned the camera off for 40 minutes on purpose. I was sure I had filmed more than that. I remembered lifting the camera at least twice during that missing stretch. There were no files, no corrupted thumbnails, no skipped file numbers, which made no sense. The camera counted as if those recordings had never happened. I took the card out and put it back in. I checked the trash folder. I ran recovery software later that day. Nothing. Maribel asked if I wanted to call someone. I asked who. Neither of us had an answer. I sent one of the clips to Lena. She called me within 5 minutes. She had watched it 3 times and thought I was messing with her until she realized I sounded wrong. Lena had worked at a raptor center years before, so I asked her about the eagle. She said, "That bird was focused on something." I asked if it could have been a person outside the frame. She was quiet for a bit. Then she said maybe, but why would every bird be looking at the same point and not moving away? I did not have a good answer. That afternoon, I went back, which was probably a stupid thing to do. I told myself it was because I wanted to see if there was a hidden trail, a weather station, a farm light, something I had missed in the fog. Really, I think I needed the place to look normal again. The fog had lifted by then. The marsh was bright and plain under a pale sky. Trucks passed on the road. A man in a green jacket was photographing swans near the pullout. Everything looked smaller. The ditch, the rose hips, the snag with the eagle gone from it. Nothing was far away enough or close enough to explain what I had seen. The dike road was visible in the distance, with no signs, poles, or structures where the light had hovered. I walked to the spot where I had stood. The mud had dried a little, but my boot prints were still there, so were the bird tracks. The semicircle was harder to see in daylight, less perfect than it had seemed in the fog, but it was real. I took pictures of it with my phone. Near the rose hips, the grass was flattened in a narrow line leading toward the water. It could have been deer. It could have been people. There were no clear prints. A few reeds were bent at odd angles, all leaning inward toward a patch of mud about the size of a kitchen table. In the middle of that patch, the mud had dried smooth. No tracks, no grass, just a flat, dull oval. I stood there longer than I meant to. The man in the green jacket called over and asked if I had seen something good. I almost told him. Instead, I said I was checking for owl pellets. He nodded like that made sense and went back to his swans. I made it home before dark. I copied the footage onto 2 drives and then put the memory card in a drawer. That night, after Maribel went to bed, I watched the long clip again in the living room with the headphones on. At 8:14 in the video, a small song sparrow appeared from the lower right corner. I had not noticed it before. It hopped onto a bent reed, faced the empty place over the rose hips, and opened its beak like it was calling. No sound came through. The low tone had already ended. The sparrow stayed like that, beak open, for 7 seconds. Then it closed its beak and turned its head toward the camera. Not toward where I had been standing in the marsh. Toward the camera. straight down the lens. It held that position until the clip ended. The first ones showed up just past the overlook on Highway 160, where the road started dropping into the canyon towards South Fork. I was driving alone in my old Subaru, coming back from Durango later than I meant to, and the weather had been ugly for the last hour. Not a full storm, just that wet mountain mix where it was rain at one bend and sleet at the next. The wipers had been going since Pagosa Springs. The heater was on too high. My coffee had gone cold in the cup holder. I had taken that road plenty of times before. I worked as a repair tech for a small internet company, and we had customers scattered all over those towns. That day, I had been out near Bayfield, replacing a busted radio on a grain silo. Then I stopped for dinner because I did not want to eat gas station food again. By the time I started heading home, it was already dark. There was almost no traffic once I got past Wolf Creek Pass. I saw one semi pulled over with chains on and one pickup going the other way, but after that it was just my headlights, wet pavement, and the black wall of trees on both sides. The road had that shine it gets when it is cold enough to make you nervous but not cold enough to look frozen. I was tired, but not falling asleep tired. I had the window cracked so the cold air hit my face. I had a podcast playing low, some guy talking about old baseball scandals, and I remember being annoyed because the Bluetooth kept cutting out whenever the road dipped. The first flash looked like an animal's eyes. It was straight ahead, maybe 50 yards past the next curve, 2 little points reflecting my headlights from the right shoulder. I slowed a little because deer were everywhere up there. Then I saw more of them. Not 2, not 10, hundreds. They were spread across the road and above it, hanging in the air from maybe knee height up to higher than my windshield. Tiny points of light, all the same size, all reflecting white. They looked like dewdrops on a spider web, except there was no web and no branch to hold them. They filled the lane ahead of me like someone had sprinkled glitter into the air and frozen it there. I took my foot off the gas. At first I thought it was sleet. That would have made sense. The headlights catch ice pellets and make them sparkle, but these points did not move. The wipers swept across the glass and I could see rain sliding up the windshield, but the dots out there stayed fixed in place. They did not fall. They did not drift. They did not blow sideways in the wind. I rolled forward at maybe 20 miles an hour, waiting for them to resolve into something normal. A road sign with reflectors, a flock of bugs, a low cloud of mist. But the closer I got, the less sense it made. They were not on the windshield. I leaned left and right in my seat, and the points shifted like real objects outside the car. They were not reflections from the dash either. I turned the podcast off and dimmed the instrument panel with the little wheel by my knee. Nothing changed. The road curved gently left, and the points stayed exactly where they were, suspended over both lanes and spilling into the trees. My headlights lit them up more and more as I approached. They had no color, just hard white pinpricks. I braked to a crawl. The Subaru's tires hissed on the wet road. Somewhere under the car, slush scraped against the wheel well. I looked in the rearview mirror, partly because I was worried about somebody coming up behind me, but the road back there was empty and black. When the hood reached the first few points, they vanished. Not flew away, not popped, not faded. They were just no longer there. The next row vanished when the car reached them too. It was like my headlights were revealing a curtain of tiny reflections, but the curtain only existed until I got close enough to touch it. I could not see anything hit the windshield. Nothing landed on the hood. The wipers did not smear anything. There was no sound. I stopped the car in the middle of the lane. The points ahead remained perfectly still. The ones beside the front fenders were gone. I sat there with both hands on the wheel and stared through the windshield, breathing too hard for how little had happened. I cracked the window farther. Cold air rushed in. The smell was wet pine and hot dust from the heater vents. I listened. No buzzing. No tapping rain beyond the light patter already hitting the roof. No birds, no branches, no engine noise except my own. The tiny lights hovered ahead of me over the yellow center line, each one separate from the others. They were at different depths, so when I moved my head I could tell some were close and some were farther down the road. I grabbed my phone from the passenger seat and opened the camera. My hand shook enough that I had to brace the phone against the steering wheel. On the screen, the road looked normal. Dark trees, wet pavement, headlights fading into sleet. No points. I looked over the phone. The points were there. I took a picture anyway, then a short video. The phone kept trying to focus on the windshield, so I tapped past it into the road. Still nothing showed on the screen. I could see the lights with my eyes, bright and sharp, while the camera showed empty air. That was when I noticed the temperature readout on the dash. It had said 33 degrees earlier. Now it said 19. I knew those sensors were not perfect, especially with slush on the car, but 19 was wrong. It had not dropped 14 degrees in 10 minutes. The heater was still blasting, yet the air coming through the cracked window felt colder than before, the kind of cold that made the bones in my hand ache. I closed the window and put the car in park. I do not know why I did that. Maybe stopping felt safer than driving into something I did not understand. Maybe I thought if I sat long enough, another car would come along and either prove I was seeing something real or make me feel stupid. I turned on my hazards. The orange flashes lit the trees on both sides, and for a second, the floating points reflected amber instead of white. That made me feel worse. They were reflecting my lights. They were physically out there in some way. I sat there for a few minutes. The engine idled rough like it always did when it was cold. The defroster clicked. A drop of water ran down the inside of the windshield near the inspection sticker. I kept watching the points. They did not shift even slightly. Then the road ahead went quiet in a strange way. It had already been quiet, but this was different. The rain stopped hitting the roof. The wipers dragged across glass that was suddenly almost dry. I could still see wet streaks in the headlights, but nothing was landing. The forest seemed to pull back from the car. Even the engine sounded muffled, like I was hearing it through a wall. My ears filled with pressure. I swallowed, and my right ear popped hard enough to hurt. At the same time, the points all brightened. Not a lot, just enough that I noticed. They hung there in the road like stars brought down to hood level. The dash clock changed from 10:48 to 10:52. I stared at it. 4 minutes gone in one blink of the display. The engine had not surged. I had not nodded off. I had been looking straight ahead, eyes open. I knew that with the kind of certainty that made it worse. I put the car back in drive. I wanted to be out of there. I did not care if I drove through a cloud of weird reflective ice or bugs or whatever it was. I just wanted movement, distance, a gas station, a person behind a counter. I eased off the brake. The Subaru rolled forward. The points vanished as the car reached them, row by row. I could see them disappearing along the edges of the hood. I leaned forward without meaning to, trying to catch one of them at the exact second it went. There was nothing to catch. One moment it was a tiny hard reflection, the next the space was empty. Then the road opened into a longer straight stretch, and my headlights reached farther. There were more. They filled the entire road ahead, much thicker than before. Hundreds became thousands. They hung between the tree trunks too, deeper in the forest, spaced evenly enough that they looked arranged, but not in a pattern I could name. Some were low near the ground. Some were high in the branches. All of them were still. I slowed again, but I did not stop. The car felt wrong as I passed through them, not like hitting things, more like the air had texture. The steering wheel gave tiny little tugs, left and right, as if the tires were crossing shallow grooves. The headlights seemed dimmer, though the bulbs had been replaced that fall. Beyond the floating points, the road looked darker than it should have. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. The screen lit up with a missed call from my brother Trevor. That made no sense because there had been no signal for miles. Before I could grab it, the screen went black. Then it lit again. Missed call from Trevor, same time. Then again. 3 missed calls stacked in the notification bar, all marked 10:49. The dash clock said 10:57. I reached for the phone and almost drifted over the center line. The lane warning beeped, which scared me more than the dots because it was a normal car sound in the middle of something that did not feel normal. I put both hands back on the wheel. A shape moved in the trees to my right. I only caught it because it blocked some of the reflective points. It was not a figure exactly. It It was more like a section of darkness sliding between trunks, tall and narrow, moving parallel to the car. I turned my head too fast and saw nothing except pine trees and wet snow on the ground. The points in that area were gone now, a dark gap shaped like a doorway. I pressed the gas. The car did not respond right away. The engine revved, but the Subaru crawled like I was towing something heavy. The speedometer hovered at 25, even though my foot was halfway down. I checked the mirrors again. Behind me, the floating points filled the road I had already driven through. That should not have been possible. They had vanished when I reached them. But there they were in the rear view, tiny white reflections hanging in the lane behind me, getting smaller with distance, but not moving. I started talking to myself then. Nothing important, just stupid practical stuff. Keep driving. Don't stop. Watch the road. You're fine. My voice sounded flat in the car, like it belonged to someone on a recording. The road bent right around a rock wall. I knew that curve. There was a turnout after it with a brown sign for a trailhead, then a steep drop on the left. I had driven it in daylight, in snow, behind tourists riding their brakes. I knew where I was. But after the curve, the turnout was not there. The road kept going straight through trees I did not recognize. The lane lines were the same. The guardrail was the same dull silver. But the rock wall should have been on my right, and instead there were tall pines close to the shoulder. I looked for mile markers. Nothing. The GPS on my phone showed a gray grid for half a second, then searching. The points thinned out. There were only a few dozen now, scattered ahead like the last sparks from a fire. The engine suddenly caught, and the car lurched forward so hard my seatbelt locked. I let off the gas and swore. The speedometer jumped to 42, then settled. The heater stopped blowing hot air. Cold came through the vents with a damp smell, like soil under a porch. The windshield fogged from the inside. I hit the defrost button, wiped a clear patch with my sleeve, and kept driving through it because stopping did not feel like an option anymore. The last cluster of points hung over the road near a yellow sign. I could not read the sign at first because the points were in front of it. There were maybe 30 of them, hovering in a loose oval about as wide as my car. I slowed without meaning to. They were brighter than the others, or maybe they looked brighter because there were fewer of them. Each one reflected the headlights, but the reflections did not line up right. Some shone from angles that my headlights should not have reached. As the hood reached the oval, every point went dark at the same time. Not one by one. All together. For half a second, the headlights showed something pale hanging in the air where the lights had been. It was flat and thin, almost like a sheet of clear plastic catching the light, but it had no edges I could follow. It sagged in the middle, then tightened, then was gone. I drove straight through the space where it had been. The car filled with a dry static smell. The radio screen flickered on by itself and showed 88.3 FM, but there was no sound. Then I was back at the missing turnout. The brown trailhead sign was on my right. The rock wall was behind me in the rear view. The road was normal, wet and empty, dropping towards South Fork. Rain hit the windshield again so hard the wipers squeaked. The dash temperature read 32 degrees. The clock said 11:18. I pulled into the turnout because my legs were shaking too badly to keep driving. The moment I stopped, the engine idled normally and the heater started blowing warm again. My phone had one bar. I called Trevor because of the missed calls. He answered annoyed, not worried. He said I had called him 3 times and not said anything. He had heard road noise, then a sound like someone rubbing a microphone with cloth, then what he thought was me breathing. The calls had come in at 10:49, 10:49, and 10:50. I told him I had not called him. He asked if I had pocket dialed him. I said maybe because I could not explain it, and I did not want to be sitting in that turnout saying the real thing out loud. While I was talking to him, a truck came around the bend behind me. A normal white county truck with a plow mount on the front. It passed slowly, tires spraying water, and the driver tapped his brakes when he saw me. For a second, I thought about waving him down. Then he kept going, and I let him. I stayed parked until I could make my hands work. I checked the photos and video on my phone. The pictures showed the road, my headlights, rain, nothing else. The video was worse. It had audio for the first 4 seconds, then silence. Not quiet, Silence, like the microphone had been covered or cut. The image showed the empty road shaking with my hand. Near the end, the camera jerked toward the passenger window, even though I did not remember moving it. The trees outside were just black shapes. There was one thing in that video I did not notice until later. For a single frame, the raindrops on the passenger window reflected tiny white points from outside. They were behind the car. I drove the rest of the way home at 35 miles an hour. Every reflector post made my stomach tighten. Every wet branch looked like it was leaning too far into the road. A few miles outside South Fork, I passed a chain-up area with 2 RVs parked in it. Lights were on in one of them. I almost pulled in just to be near people, but I kept going because home was less than 20 minutes away. My wife, Nicole, was still awake when I got there. She was sitting on the couch folding laundry with the TV on mute. She said she had been about to call because I was later than I said I would be. I asked her what time she thought I was supposed to get home. She said around 11. I looked at the microwave clock, 11:44. I told her some weird weather had slowed me down. That was all I could manage at first. I took off my boots by the door and noticed mud packed into the tread, which was odd because I had not stepped outside the car after leaving Durango, except at the turnout, which was paved with gravel. The mud was dark and smelled like the wet soil smell that had come through the vents. I cleaned it with a screwdriver over the trash can while Nicole watched me. She asked what happened. I told her most of it in pieces. The floating points, the phone calls, the road not looking right. I left out the shape in the trees until later because that part sounded too much like something I would not believe from someone else. Nicole asked if I had driven through a swarm of insects. In November at 10,000 feet in sleet. She knew it did not make sense as soon as she said it. The next morning, I went out to check the Subaru in daylight. The hood and windshield were clean except for normal road grit. No insect splatter, no sap, no little dents from hail. The headlights worked. The dash sensor read normal. I checked under the car for anything dragging because of how it had felt heavy on the road, but there was nothing. Then I saw the front license plate. It had a line of tiny marks across it, maybe 20 or 30, running from the upper left corner to the lower right. They were not scratches exactly, more like the reflective coating had been pressed with pinheads. Each mark was a perfect little dull spot about the size of a grain of sand. I rubbed them with my thumb. They did not come off. I took pictures and sent them to my coworker, Sal, because he knew cars better than I did. He said maybe road salt or gravel did it. I asked why it was only on the plate and not the bumper or hood. He sent back a shrug emoji and told me to stop driving mountain roads at night. I tried to forget it for a couple days. That did not work because of the calls. Trevor sent me screenshots from his call log. 3 incoming calls from me, all at 10:49 and 10:50. My phone showed no outgoing calls at that time. It showed no service from 10:41 to 11:19, then a call to Trevor from the turnout at 11:20. The phone company app showed nothing useful, just the normal bill details, no record of the 3 calls at all. A week later, I drove that road again in daylight for work. I told myself I had to because avoiding it would make it bigger in my head. The weather was clear. Snow sat in patches under the trees. The turnouts and signs were all where they were supposed to be. I stopped near the place I thought it had started, just past the overlook. There was a narrow shoulder and a steep bank down into the trees. I walked along the guardrail for a few minutes, looking for anything that could have reflected my headlights. Bottles, wires, survey tape, animal eyes, anything. There was nothing like that. But on the asphalt near the center line, I found a cluster of small, dull spots. They looked almost exactly like the marks on my license plate. Tiny round places where the road paint and wet grit had a faint gray scuff. They made a loose oval, maybe 6 feet across. Cars must have driven over them for a week, and they were barely visible unless I crouched down. A pickup came around the bend while I was kneeling there, and I stood up fast because I realized how I looked. The driver slowed, probably thinking I had dropped something. I waved like everything was fine. He kept going. Before I got back in my car, I looked down the road into the trees. The morning sun was hitting the wet branches. and for a second every drop of water on them flashed white at once. It was normal, just sunlight on water. Then one point stayed bright after the others went dull. It was about shoulder high, 20 feet off the road, between two pine trunks. I looked straight at it. It did not move. It did not drip. It stayed there for maybe 3 seconds, then it was simply gone. The porch light clicked on at 2:41 for the first time on a Tuesday, bright enough to wake me up through the gap in the curtains. My bedroom faced the front of the house, and the light was mounted under the little roof over the steps, pointed too high because I had installed it myself and never fixed the angle. When it came on, it hit the ceiling above my bed in a hard white square. I lay there for a few seconds, listening. My house was in a quiet subdivision outside Bowling Green, Kentucky. Not rural exactly, but far enough out that the backyards opened to old pasture and a tree line. The houses on our street were spread out with ditches instead of sidewalks and mailboxes on posts by the road. At night, it was usually just dogs barking 2 streets over, frogs in the drainage pond, and the low hum of the highway if the wind came from the west. I thought it was probably a cat. My neighbor, Mrs. Kincaid, fed every stray animal within 5 miles. I had seen raccoons on my porch too, trying to get into the birdseed bucket. I checked the clock on my phone. 2:41 a.m. The light stayed on for maybe 20 seconds, then shut off. I rolled over and tried to sleep, but I kept listening for footsteps or the sound of someone messing with the door. Nothing came. After a while, the house settled back into its normal clicks and creaks, and I must have drifted off. The next morning, I noticed the mailbox was open. Not wide open, just cracked about 2 inches. The little metal door hanging down enough that I saw the dark gap from the porch. It had rained before sunrise, and the mail inside was damp along the edges. It was junk mail mostly, a grocery flyer and 1 bill, but it annoyed me because I always closed the mailbox. I had replaced the latch the previous summer after it got loose, and it snapped shut firmly when you pressed it. I blamed the mail carrier at first. Then I remembered the mail did not come at night. I checked the porch camera before work. It was one of those motion cameras that clipped events and sent alerts to your phone. It had recorded a possum at 11:18 and my own truck leaving the driveway at 7:06. Nothing at 2:41. No clip. No alert. No person walking up to the box. Nothing. That should have been the end of it, but it happened again the next night. Same white square on the ceiling. Same soft click from the motion light outside. I opened my eyes and already knew the time before I looked. 2:41. This time I got out of bed. I did it slowly because I did not want the floorboards to creak. I lived alone then. My wife, Dana, had moved out in May, and we were in that awkward stretch where neither of us had filed anything, but both of us knew where it was heading. The house felt bigger after she left. Sounds traveled differently. I was still not used to waking up and hearing only myself breathing. I went to the window and moved the curtain with 1 finger. The porch was empty. The light washed over the steps, the wet railing, the old flower pots Dana had left behind. Beyond that, the driveway was dark except for the silver roof of my truck. The mailbox stood at the road about 30 yards away, just outside the main throw of the porch light. The door looked closed from where I stood, but it was hard to tell. I stayed there until the light shut off. Then I checked the camera app. No event. The live view showed the porch empty and the street black. The motion sensor had obviously triggered the light, but the camera had not triggered at all. They were separate devices, different brands, different power sources. The camera was battery. The light was wired. I told myself that mattered in a normal way somehow, like one sensitivity setting was higher than the other. In the morning, the mailbox was open again. Same amount, 2 inches, maybe 3. The door had not dropped fully, just enough to show the dark inside. I stood at the road in my work boots, staring at it while a school bus hissed past on the main road. The latch made a sharp click when I closed it. I opened and shut it 5 or 6 times. It worked every time. That day at lunch, I bought a second camera. It was cheap, meant for hunters. One of those trail cams you strap to a tree. I put fresh batteries in it and mounted it to the maple at the edge of the driveway, aimed right at the mailbox. I set it to take video on motion and also 1 photo every 5 minutes, whether anything moved or not. I felt kind of dumb doing it, but I also felt better after it was up. At 2:41, the porch light came on again. By then, I had already been awake for almost an hour, lying stiff in bed and watching the minute numbers change. The room was cold because I had turned off the heat to hear better. When the light clicked on, it did not scare me exactly. It was worse than that. It felt scheduled. I sat up and waited. The house was quiet, no footsteps on gravel, no car engine, no dogs barking. I heard a faint tapping, 3 little taps spaced out from somewhere outside. Not on the front door, farther away. Maybe the mailbox, maybe a branch. I grabbed the aluminum baseball bat from the corner of the room and went down the hall. I did not turn on any lights. At the front door, I looked through the peephole. The porch was empty, but the light outside had changed the look of the yard. The fog had come in low from the fields, and it sat in strips above the ditch like white cloth. The mailbox was a dark block by the road. I could not see the door. I wanted to open the front door, but my hand would not turn the knob. Instead, I stood there in socks with the bat hanging at my side until the porch light went out. When it did, the house did not get dark right away. There was a faint gray glow from outside, like moonlight, except the sky had been cloudy when I went to bed. It faded after a few seconds. I went back upstairs and checked both cameras. The porch camera had no recording. The trail cam had recorded at 2:40. I opened the clip, expecting at least a raccoon or a neighborhood kid. The video showed the mailbox closed. The timestamp in the corner read 2:40:58. The image was grainy, black and white, the road empty, the ditch bright from infrared. At 2:41, the video froze. Not glitched with blocks or static. Froze like someone had pressed pause. The time stayed at 2:41 for the rest of the 30-second clip. The grass did not move. The branch in the top of frame stayed bent in the same exact position. Then the next file started at 2:41:35, with the mailbox still closed. In the morning, the mailbox was open. I did not go to work on Thursday. I called in and said I had stomach trouble. That was not completely false. My stomach had been tight since I woke up. I walked the yard in daylight and looked for footprints, tire marks, anything. The ground around the mailbox was damp and soft from the rain. My own boot prints showed clearly. The mail carrier's tire track was visible along the shoulder. There were no fresh footprints near the box. No animal tracks either, which seemed unlikely because that ditch always had prints in the mud. Deer, raccoon, dogs. But the mud within a few feet of the mailbox was smooth, like it had been wiped with a flat board. Not dry, not disturbed in a normal way, just smooth. I called the county sheriff's office and asked if anyone had reported people messing with mailboxes. The dispatcher was polite, but not concerned. She said they had some teenagers breaking flags off last month, but nothing recent. She told me to call back if I saw someone or if anything was stolen. Nothing had been stolen. That was part of the problem. Bills, flyers, one small padded envelope with a phone charger inside. All still there, just damp because the door kept opening. Thursday night, I put a piece of painter's tape over the mailbox door and wrote a little mark across it with a Sharpie so I would know if it moved. I also set a kitchen chair in the front room and stayed there with the lights off. I had coffee in a travel mug, my phone, the bat, and an old jacket over my lap. It felt ridiculous, like I was guarding Fort Knox instead of a dented black mailbox. By 1:30, the neighborhood had gone completely quiet. A car passed once on the road, tires whispering on damp pavement. After that, nothing. At 2:36, the frogs stopped. I did not notice right away. It was one of those sounds that filled the background until it disappeared. The drainage pond behind the houses had been loud all night with spring peepers, even though it was late September and cooler than usual. Then, all at once, the yard went silent. I sat up straight. At 2:39, my phone lost service. The little bars vanished, then the Wi-Fi symbol disappeared too, even though the router was in the next room. I opened the camera app. It spun and said it could not connect. At 2:41, the porch light came on. From the chair, I could see the front porch through the side window. The light hit the railing and the dead ferns in their hanging baskets. No person stood there. No animal crossed the steps. I did not move. Then I heard the mailbox door creak. It was a small sound, but I knew it. Anyone who has had an old rural mailbox knows that thin metal squeal. It came from the road, clear through the closed window. I got up too fast and banged my knee against the coffee table. The pain was sharp enough to make me suck in air. I limped to the door, unlocked the deadbolt, and opened it. Cold, wet air came into the house. The porch light stayed on above me. The yard was empty. The road was empty. The mailbox door was open. Only now it was open all the way. It hung down flat, black mouth facing the house. The blue tape I had put on it was split clean through the middle. I stepped onto the porch with the bat. The second my bare foot crossed the threshold, the light went out. I froze. The dark was too sudden. My eyes had adjusted to the porch light, and for a few seconds I could not see anything except the dull, pale shape of the road and the lighter stripe of the ditch. I reached back for the doorframe without looking away from the mailbox. Then something reflected near the mailbox. Not eyes. Too high and too steady. It was a small vertical shine about where a person's chest would be if someone was standing in the ditch. I thought it was a wet fence post catching light from somewhere, but there was no light now. No moon. No cars. The shine held for a second, then slid sideways behind the mailbox post and disappeared. I backed into the house and shut the door. I locked it, then locked the deadbolt, then stood with my back against it like a kid. My knee hurt. My foot was cold and wet. I listened for footsteps, but heard only my own breathing and the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. The porch light clicked on again at 2:43. That had not happened before. It stayed on for maybe 5 seconds and shut off. Then it clicked on again. 5 seconds. Off. On again. 5 seconds. I did not sleep the rest of the night. At first light, I went out with shoes on and a flashlight I did not need. The mailbox door was open. The tape was cut or torn right across the latch. The Sharpie line did not line up. Inside the mailbox, the mail sat pushed all the way to the back, damp but untouched. There was also a smell inside I could not place at first. Kind of like hot dust on a light bulb, mixed with wet pennies. On the underside of the mailbox door, there were 3 small dents from the inside out. That bothered me more than everything else that morning. They were shallow, round dents, evenly spaced, like someone had pressed the rounded end of a screwdriver from inside the box. But the door had been closed when I taped it. Nothing was inside except mail. I pulled the trail cam from the tree and checked the card on my laptop. The same thing happened as before. It recorded the road normally until 2:40:59. Then the video froze. At 2:41, the timestamp stopped moving. The next file began at 2:42:12. The mailbox was already open in that file. But there was one photo from the 5-minute interval setting that did not fit. It was stamped 2:41. The image was mostly black, not the usual infrared gray. The road was invisible. The mailbox was just a darker block. In the center of the frame, above the ditch, there were 4 pale smudges in a line. They were not bright. They looked like reflections seen through fogged glass. I zoomed in until the image turned blocky. The smudges had soft edges, but each one had a darker dot in the middle. Dana came by that evening to pick up some winter clothes she had left in the hall closet. I had not planned to tell her because we were already strained enough, but she knew me too well. She asked why I looked like I had not slept. I showed her the mailbox. She humored me at first. I could see that. She did the same thing I had done, opening and shutting the door, testing the latch. Then I showed her the frozen videos, the split tape, and the photo with the 4 smudges. She watched all of it without saying much. When it ended, she asked, "Why is the porch light not recording them?" I said I did not know. She looked out toward the road. The sun was down by then, and the sky over the pastures was dark purple. "You should come stay at my apartment tonight." I almost said yes. I wanted to. But some stubborn part of me hated the idea of leaving my own house because of a mailbox. Also, I thought if I left, I would never know what was happening. That sounded reasonable in my head at the time. Dana said she was not staying there with me, and I did not blame her. Before she left, she helped me set up one more thing. We tied fishing line from the mailbox door to a stack of empty soda cans on the porch. If the door opened, the cans would fall. It was simple and dumb, but it was not wireless, not motion activated, not anything that could freeze at 2:41. I also put a strip of flour across the mud around the mailbox and another across the porch steps. That night was colder, the kind of damp cold that got into the walls. I sat in the front room again, wearing a hoodie and boots this time. I left every light off. The fishing line ran from the mailbox across the yard low enough that it would be hard to see, up to the cans stacked near the door. At 2:20, I started recording on my phone from inside the window. I plugged it into a charger so the battery would not die. The screen showed the dark yard and the faint outline of the mailbox. At 2:34, Mrs. Kincaid's dog started barking. It barked 3 times, then made a low whining sound I had never heard from it before. After that, silence. The frogs were already quiet. At 2:39, my phone screen flickered. The video kept recording, but the image brightened and dimmed like the exposure could not settle. The mailbox blurred, sharpened, blurred again. I could hear my own breathing on the recording. At 2:41, the porch light came on. The cans did not move. The mailbox stayed closed. I watched it through the phone and with my own eyes. Everything was still. No fog this time. No rain. The air looked clear, which somehow made it worse because there was less to blame. Then the fishing line lifted. It did not pull toward the mailbox. It lifted straight up from the grass in the middle of the yard, as if something had raised it with a finger. The cans rattled once on the porch, but did not fall. I could see the line shining in the porch light, tight and trembling. I stood up. The line stayed raised about a foot off the ground. Then it lowered gently back into the grass. The mailbox door opened. The cans should have gone everywhere. The line should have snapped tight and dragged them down the steps. Instead, the door opened and the fishing line stayed slack. It lay in the grass between the house and the road like it had been cut, but I had not heard it break. I looked at the cans. They were stacked neatly, untouched. I looked back at the mailbox. For a moment, there was something behind it, not a person. I could not make it into a body. It was more like a patch of the background had the wrong texture. The road and ditch behind the mailbox looked grainy, like an old TV picture. And that grainy patch was taller than the mailbox post and very still. The porch light shut off. My phone stopped recording. The screen went black even though it was plugged in. I pressed the side button. Nothing. I held it down. Nothing. I sat back down because my knees felt weak. I kept the bat across my lap and stared at the dark window until I could see the mailbox again by the faint light from the sky. The door was open. The line was invisible in the grass. The yard looked empty. At 3:17, the phone turned back on by itself. The battery showed 61%. The video file stopped at 2:41 exactly. It showed the line lifting, then the first inch of the mailbox door opening, then the image smeared sideways and ended. The audio continued for 2 more seconds after the picture froze. On it, under the small rattle of the cans, there was a sound like a man quietly clearing his throat. But I had not heard that in the room. I slept on the couch after sunrise for maybe 40 minutes and woke up feeling sick and stupid. I went outside with a kitchen knife to cut down the fishing line. It had not broken. It was still tied to the mailbox door and still tied to the cans. Somehow it had gone slack while the door opened, then tightened again afterward. There was no way to do that unless the line had stretched several feet and then unstretched, which it had not. The flower on the porch steps was untouched. The flower near the mailbox was different. There were no footprints. Not human, not animal. But the flower had moved outward from the base of the post in thin lines, like it had been blown from the center by a small burst of air. The lines pointed in all directions. The mud underneath was smooth again. Inside the mailbox, there was one thing that did not belong. A small square of paper sat on top of the mail. At first I thought it was part of an envelope, but it was thicker, almost like photo paper. It was blank on one side. On the other side was a gray image, blurry and low contrast. It took me a minute to understand what I was looking at. It was my front porch. The angle was wrong. It was taken from inside the mailbox, looking back toward the house through the open door. The porch light was on. The front door was open a crack. I was standing in that crack, holding the bat, barefoot from Thursday night. I dropped it in the yard. Then I picked it back up because leaving it there felt worse. I called Dana. I told her I was coming over and asked if I could bring the dog crate, even though we did not have a dog anymore. I do not know why I said that. I think I wanted an excuse to pack something that made sense. She told me to just come. I spent the rest of the morning taking down cameras and throwing clothes into a duffel bag. I left the mailbox open because I did not want to touch it again. Before I drove away, I sat in the truck and looked at the house. In daylight, it looked normal. Brick front, cheap shutters, porch steps that needed paint. Nothing about it looked like a place where strange things happened. I stayed at Dana's apartment for 2 nights. Nothing happened there. I slept badly, but I slept. On Sunday afternoon, I went back to the house with Dana and her brother Marcus. Marcus was a big guy, a deputy in Warren County, and he had brought his off-duty pistol even though he kept saying it was probably some neighbor messing with me. The mailbox was closed when we arrived. I know I had left it open. Marcus checked it first. He opened the door with 2 fingers and looked inside. Empty except for a supermarket flyer and a water bill. No smell. No dents I had not already seen. He walked the yard, checked the ditch, looked under the porch, shined a flashlight into the crawl space. He found nothing. I could tell he wanted to be helpful, but also did not want to encourage me. Dana stood by the truck, arms crossed, watching the road. I decided to grab more clothes while they were there. Inside, the house smelled stale, like it had been closed up for weeks instead of 2 days. I went upstairs to the bedroom. The curtains were still half open. The bed was unmade. The square of porch light was not on the ceiling because it was afternoon, but I found myself looking there anyway. On the nightstand, my alarm clock was flashing. Not 12 like after a power outage, 2:41. I unplugged it and put it in a drawer. I moved out the next weekend. Not officially at first. I just took what I needed and stayed at Dana's until I found a small rental on the other side of town. The house sat empty for a month before I listed it. The realtor asked about the mailbox because the door hung crooked and the latch did not line up anymore. I told her a delivery truck had bumped it. The night before closing, I went back alone to do one final walkthrough. I should not have gone at night, but work ran late and the buyers wanted the keys the next morning. It was cool and dry with clear stars and no wind. I parked in the driveway, left the truck running, and walked through the house fast. No furniture, no rugs, every room echoing. I checked windows, back door, thermostat, breaker panel. Everything was fine. When I stepped back onto the porch, the motion light came on. I looked at my watch, 2:41. I had not realized it was that late. I had lost track, cleaning the kitchen cabinet under the sink. The street was empty. The mailbox stood by the road with its little red flag down and its door closed. I walked to my truck without looking away from it. Halfway down the steps, I heard the mailbox creak. The door opened 2 inches. I got in the truck, locked the doors, and backed out so fast the tires chirped on the driveway. As I turned onto the road, the headlights swept across the mailbox. For a second, the open door reflected bright white. Behind it, in the dark space inside the box, 4 pale spots sat in a straight line, steady and dull, like something small was looking out from the back. I had the lower bunk in carriage C, the one closest to the door that connected to the next coach. I remember that because every time the train took a bend, the door rattled in its frame and the little metal latch clicked 3 times, like someone tapping a coin against a table. I was on the Caledonian Sleeper heading north from London to Inverness. It was late November, and I had booked the cheap shared berth because I was going up to help my sister move out of a flat in Nairn. I had a backpack, a phone charger, a packet of mints, and one of those meal deal sandwiches I never ate because the train made me feel slightly sick. The man above me was called Callum. I knew that because the attendant checked our tickets and said his name out loud. He was maybe early 30s, neat beard, soft voice, worked in IT from the sound of a phone call he made before we left Euston. Across the aisle, in the other set of bunks, there was an older woman named Moira and a student called Dina, who had a bright yellow suitcase with one wheel that squeaked every time she moved it. None of us talked much after the first half hour. That kind of sleeper train silence settled in, where everyone tried to be polite and pretend they weren't hearing every cough and zip and plastic bag rustle. The train left on time. I watched the station lights slide away, then the dim backs of buildings, then long black stretches where the windows became mirrors. By midnight, most people in the carriage had gone quiet. I had trouble sleeping because the heating was too high and the air felt dry. I lay there with one arm out from the blanket, listening to the rhythm of the tracks and the low hum from under the floor. Now and then the train slowed, and I saw the orange glow of some empty platform smear across the ceiling. At some point after Preston, I gave up trying to sleep and sat up halfway. I checked my phone. It said 1:43. No signal, which didn't surprise me. The carriage was dark, except for the narrow blue aisle lights along the floor and the red standby dots on people's chargers. I remember looking out of the window across from my bunk. The blind was halfway down, not fully closed, and through the gap I could see rain on the glass. Not heavy rain, more like fine wet streaks moving sideways because of the speed. Beyond that, nothing much, just dark fields and the occasional pinprick from a farmhouse or a road. That was when I first noticed the sound. It wasn't loud. It sat underneath the train noise, almost like pressure in my ears before a tunnel. A low, flat tone, not mechanical exactly. More like the sound you get when a speaker is on but nothing is playing, only deeper. I swallowed a few times, thinking my ears needed to pop, but it stayed there. I looked around. Callum above me was asleep, or seemed to be. Dina had one foot hanging over the side of her bunk. Moira had pulled her blanket up around her shoulders. Farther down the carriage, I could see shapes of other passengers under blankets, heads turned to the wall or toward the aisle. Then the lights along the floor flickered. Not off, just dimmer, then bright again. It happened twice, with maybe 5 seconds between. I waited for someone to stir, but nobody did. The tone kept going, steady and low, and for some reason I felt like I needed to be very still. I told myself it was some electrical thing. Trains had noises. Old coaches made weird sounds. It was cold outside and wet. There were a dozen boring explanations. Then the rain on the windows stopped moving. That sounds wrong, but that was how it looked. The streaks didn't slide or wobble with the motion anymore. They held in place on the glass like the train had stopped, except the track noise was still going and the floor still trembled under me. I leaned forward just a little and looked through the gap under the blind. The dark outside had changed. It wasn't black anymore. It had gone gray, but not the normal gray of dawn or station lights. It was a flat, pale gray with no direction to it, like light coming through thick fog. I couldn't see fields. I couldn't see the reflection of the carriage either. Just that gray brightness pressed against the window. My first thought was that we were passing through a lit industrial area or a long tunnel with white walls, but there were no shadows, no posts flashing by, no pattern. The light was too even. The tone got stronger. I felt it in my teeth. I must have lain back down then, because the next thing I remembered clearly was waking up. Not drifting awake. Not turning over and realizing I had slept. I snapped awake with my eyes open, flat on my back, both hands gripping the blanket at my chest. At almost the exact same time, Callum above me gasped. Across the aisle, Dina sat up so fast she hit her head on the underside of the bunk frame. Moira said, "Oh God," very quietly. Then other people started waking up. It moved down the carriage like someone had pulled a string. A man coughed hard 2 compartments away. A woman near the far end said, "What was that?" Someone's phone hit the floor. A child in another berth started crying. Not loudly, but in that tired, confused way kids cry when they don't know where they are. For a few seconds, nobody did anything. We all just listened. The train was still moving. The normal clatter was back. The floor lights were steady. The window was black again, except for my own face and the shape of Callum climbing halfway down the ladder. Dina had one hand on her forehead and the other wrapped around the rail. She was staring at the window. Moira asked, "Did we stop?" "No," Callum said, though he didn't sound sure. I checked my phone. It said 2:17. That bothered me right away. I had looked at it at 1:43. It felt like maybe 10 minutes had passed since then. 15 at the most. I knew time could feel strange when you were half asleep, but my mouth was dry and my heart was going like I'd been running. People had started whispering. Not normal annoyed passenger whispering either. More like people in a waiting room after bad news. A man named Stuart, who I later learned was a paramedic from Sterling, came down the aisle in socks and a t-shirt. He asked if anyone needed help. He kept his voice calm, but he looked shaken. He said he had woken up standing beside his bunk with his hand on the wall. That made everyone go quiet again. Dina said, "There was light." No one answered her at first. She looked embarrassed as soon as she said it, like she wished she hadn't. She rubbed the side of her head where she'd bumped it and said, "Sorry, I saw a light outside before I woke up." Moira turned toward her. "White?" Dina nodded. Callum climbed down the rest of the way and stood in the aisle barefoot. "I saw it too," he said. "I thought it was a station." "It wasn't a station," Moira said. She sounded so certain that I looked at her properly. She was sitting upright with her blanket around her lap, her hair flattened on one side. Her face looked pale in the blue floor lighting. "I opened my eyes before," she said. "Before everybody woke. The blind was glowing around the edges." A guy from the next berth leaned out. His name was Pavel, according to his ticket sticker. He had been asleep with earbuds in, but he was holding them in his hand now, both wires tangled. "Did anyone hear humming?" he asked. I said, "Yes," before I thought about it. He looked relieved and worse at the same time. The child at the far end started crying harder. Her mother asked everyone to please keep it down. That made people lower their voices, but nobody went back to bed. The whole carriage had this held breath feeling. Callum pressed the button for the attendant. The little light above the door came on, but no one arrived. He pressed it again. Nothing. Stuart walked toward the connecting door and tried to look through the glass into the next carriage. "There's people up in there too," he said. "Looks like everyone's awake." That made the cold feeling in my stomach worse. Until then, part of me had been pretending it was just us, just our small carriage being weird together. The train leaned into a curve. The door latch clicked 3 times. Dina said, "My phone's wrong." We all checked ours then. Mine still said 2:17, even though I was sure at least a couple of minutes had passed since I first looked. Callum said 2:17. Dina said 2:17. Moira's old Nokia, which she took from a little floral pouch, said 2:17. Stuart had a digital watch. He held it under the aisle light and didn't say anything for a moment. "What?" Callum asked. "It's running," Stuart said, "but it says 2:17. We watched the seconds change on his watch. 43, 44, 45. It was running, but the minutes stayed the same. It got to 59, then went back to 00, and the minutes still didn't move. Someone behind me said, "No. No, I don't like that." I didn't either. I felt this strong urge to leave the carriage, but there was nowhere better to go. We were on a train in the middle of the night, moving through countryside I couldn't see. Stuart went to find the attendant. He slid the connecting door open, and the cold air from between the carriages came in with a wet metal smell. As soon as he stepped through, the low tone came back. Everyone heard it that time. It rose out of the floor and the walls, soft but clear. Callum grabbed the edge of the bunk above me. Dina sat back down. The crying child stopped mid-sob, which somehow made it worse. The tone held for maybe 8 seconds. Then, from outside, there was a flash. Not lightning. There was no crack, no rumble, no shape to it. The whole window on our side went white. Bright white. Not the harsh yellow of platform lights or the blue white of a train passing. It filled the gap under the blind and spilled around the edges of every curtain and blind in the carriage. Nobody screamed. That was the oddest part. We all just froze. I remember seeing my own hands against the blanket, lit up like it was daytime. Then it was gone. The train kept moving. Somebody whispered, "Close the blinds." People started pulling them down all along the carriage. The little plastic tabs clicked and snapped. I pulled ours down, but my fingers slipped twice because they were sweaty. Even after it was closed, I kept looking at the edge of it, expecting light to leak through again. Stuart came back from the next carriage with the attendant, a tired-looking woman named Leanne. She had her uniform jacket half-buttoned and her hair coming loose from a clip. She looked annoyed for about 2 seconds. Then she saw everyone's faces. "What happened?" she asked. Everyone tried to talk at once. Light, humming, phone stuck. Did we stop? Did you see anything? Did the driver say anything? Leanne held up both hands and said she'd check with the train manager. She said power fluctuations happened. She said sometimes trackside work lights were bright. She said we were probably near a junction. She didn't believe herself. I could see that. Callum showed her his phone. Still 2:17. Dina showed hers. Pavel showed a small travel clock from his bag. 2:17. Leanne took out her own phone. She looked at it, then turned the screen away too quickly. "What does yours say?" Moira asked. Leanne didn't answer. She just said, I'll be back in a minute, and moved down the aisle faster than before. The tone faded after she left, or maybe I got used to it. My ears felt blocked. There was a pressure behind my eyes. I wanted water, but didn't want to move. For the next several minutes, nobody slept. We sat in little groups, whispering across the aisle. The train didn't seem to slow. Through a tiny gap in one blind near the far end, I saw nothing but black and occasional streaks of rain. Then Pavel noticed the condensation. He had been standing near the window between the berths where there was a small section of glass with no blind. He leaned close to it and said, "There are marks." Callum and I went over. I didn't want to, but I went anyway. The glass had fogged from the inside because everyone was awake and breathing. On that fogged patch, there were 3 clean circles, each about the size of a 2-pound coin arranged in a triangle. The glass inside the circles was clear, like someone had pressed fingertips there. But the circles were too perfect, and they were on the upper part of the window, higher than anyone would naturally touch while standing in the aisle. Pavel wiped one with his sleeve. It disappeared, leaving a smear. "Could have been there already," Callum said. "Yeah," I said, though I didn't think that. Moira called from her berth. "There's one here too." Her window had the same 3 circles. So did Dina's. So did the window by the door. People checked quietly, one by one. Not every window had them, but enough did. Always 3. Always in a triangle. Always on the inside. The little girl's mother told her not to look. I checked my phone again. Still 217. No signal. Battery at 41%, which was strange because it had been at 68 when I plugged it in before trying to sleep. The charger was still connected, the little lightning symbol still showing. It should have gone up, not down. Callum's phone battery was lower too. Dina said hers had dropped from full to 12%. Moira's Nokia had turned itself off. At some point, the train began to slow. Not suddenly, just the normal heavy braking of a long train approaching a stop. We all felt it through the floor. Leanne came back as the brakes hissed. She looked less composed now. She told us we were making an unscheduled stop near a signal and asked everyone to remain in their berths. Her voice had that official calm people use when they need you to stay put. "Where are we?" Stewart asked. "North of Carlisle," she said. Pavel laughed once, not because it was funny. "That can't be right." Leanne looked at him. He held up his ticket folder where he had written his route times. "We should be past that by now." Nobody needed the schedule to know something was wrong. It felt wrong in the way your body knows when a lift drops a little too fast. The train stopped. The silence after the brakes settled was awful. Trains are never really quiet, even when stopped, but this was close. The engine hum seemed far away. The rain had stopped, or at least I couldn't hear it. No announcements came over the speaker. Then something tapped on the outside of the carriage. 3 taps. Not loud, not theatrical, just tap, tap, tap. It came from the window beside Moira's berth. She pulled back from it like it had burned her. Another 3 taps came from farther down the carriage. Then another set behind me near the door window. People moved into the aisle, away from the sides. Leanne said, "It's probably debris." No one answered. The taps came again, this time not all at once. They moved along the carriage from front to back, 3 at each window, with a pause between. Tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 pause. It sounded careful. The little girl started crying again, but softly into her mother's coat. I remember thinking that maybe workers were outside checking the train. Maybe they had poles or tools. Maybe we were stopped beside a platform edge or service walkway. I wanted that to be true so badly that I almost said it out loud. Then the white light came back. It didn't flash this time. It rose slowly outside the covered windows. The blinds glowed from the edges inward. Thin lines of light showed around the frames and at the seams where the fabric didn't sit flat. It was bright enough that our shadows showed on the opposite wall. The tone came with it, lower than before. No one moved. I looked at the door to the next carriage. Through the small window, I could see the next coach glowing too. People stood in the aisle over there, dark shapes with their heads turned toward the windows. Leanne had one hand on her radio. She pressed the button and said, "Can you confirm external lighting on C through E?" There was only static. She tried again. Static. Then, under the static, I heard something that sounded like breathing, but not through lungs. A slow, dragging pulse, in and out, in and out. Leanne heard it too. She lowered the radio and stared at it. The light stayed for maybe a minute, maybe less. Time felt loose. Stuart was standing beside me, and I could hear him whisper counting under his breath. He got to 31, stopped, started again, then stopped for good. When the light faded, the tapping stopped with it. A few seconds later, the train jolted and began to move. Everyone grabbed something. The movement felt too abrupt, like the driver had been told to go right now. The wheels screeched once, then the normal rhythm returned. The carriage lights flickered again, and the heating kicked in with a stale, hot smell. Phones started working at the same moment. Mine jumped from 217 to 306. A few people made noises when they saw it. Dina whispered, "No, no, no." Callum kept locking and unlocking his screen, like the time might change back if he caught it at the right second. Signal came back one bar at a time. Messages began arriving in little bursts. My sister had texted at 2:12 asking if I was asleep yet. Then another at 2:58 saying, "Train still on time?" I didn't reply. I didn't know what to say. Leanne told us again to remain calm. She said the train manager would make an announcement. No announcement came. After that, things became almost normal in a way that felt insulting. The train kept going. The aisle lights stayed on. People slowly returned to their berths because there was nothing else to do. No one really slept, though. I lay on my bunk with my shoes on, staring at the closed blind. Every so often, someone checked a window. The 3 circles were still there on some of them, though weaker now as the condensation changed. Pavel took photos. Callum tried to, but his camera app froze twice and then opened facing the wrong way, showing his own white face on the screen. Around 4:20, Leanne came through with paper cups of tea from the service area. Her hands shook slightly as she passed them out. I asked her if the driver had seen anything. She said, "He's dealing with the route." That was all. Moira asked if we had hit something. Leanne said no. Dina asked why we stopped. Leanne looked down the carriage before answering. "Signal issue." Was it? Leanne didn't answer that either. By the time we reached Inverness, the sky was a dull, wet gray. The train was nearly an hour late, which the final announcement blamed on operational delays overnight. People got off quietly. No one joked about it. No one complained to staff in the usual way passengers do when they've been delayed. We all seemed tired in the same specific way, like we'd been awake much longer than a night. On the platform, I saw Callum talking to Stuart near the coffee kiosk. Dina stood with her yellow suitcase, texting with both thumbs. Moira sat on a bench and stared at the train like she expected it to do something. I checked the outside of carriage C as I walked past. The windows looked normal from the platform. Wet glass, streaks of dirt, reflections of people and station lights. I don't know what I expected to see. Fingerprints, scorch marks, anything. Near the window beside my bunk, there were 3 round clean spots in the grime on the outside too. They were arranged in a triangle. I stopped walking. Someone behind me bumped my bag and muttered, "Sorry." When I looked back at the window, the spots were harder to see because rain had started again, fine and steady, running down the glass. I went to my sister's place. I helped her move boxes. I told her some of it, but not all of it, because I could hear how it sounded once I said it out loud. She asked if maybe I had dreamed the first part and then everyone else got worked up because trains are weird at night. I said maybe. It was easier than arguing. A few days later, I searched for delays on that route. I found nothing beyond the regular arrival board, showing we had come in 56 minutes late. No article, no passenger posts that I could find. Nothing about a signal issue near Carlisle, nothing about lights, nothing about the train stopping where it shouldn't have. I still had the photo I took of my phone showing 2:17. The picture was blurry because my hand had been shaking, but it showed the time clearly. Behind the phone, out of focus, the closed blind glowed faintly around the edges. I hadn't remembered taking that photo. I was working the early shift at a small weather station in western Kansas when I first saw the circle on radar. It was a Sunday morning in late May, the kind of morning where everything already felt tired before the sun came up. We had storms lined up from the Colorado border down toward the Oklahoma panhandle, and the office had been busy since about 3. Nothing severe yet, but there was enough lightning, hail reports, and weird outflow boundaries to keep everyone staring at screens. My name is Ben Voss. I was 29 then, and I had been a broadcast meteorologist for KQHY in Hayes for a little under 4 years. It sounds more impressive than it was. Our station was in a low brick building behind a furniture store, and half the time I was fixing my own mic pack or moving trash cans out from under ceiling leaks. That morning it was just me and our overnight producer, Talia Marino, plus a weekend assignment editor named Grant, who had fallen asleep in the newsroom with his hoodie over his face. Talia was cutting clips from a fire department fundraiser while I watched radar, drank bad coffee, and waited for the 6 o'clock cut-in. The storms were moving northeast, which was expected. The upper-level winds were strong out of the southwest, and everything on the screen had that same slanted push. Green and yellow rain bands. Red cores where the hail might be. Little purple specks that came and went. Normal, ugly spring weather. The circle appeared at 5:18. I remembered the time because I had just typed it into the forecast notes. Line of storms entering Trego County around 5:18. I glanced at the radar loop after that, and there it was. At first I thought it was a data dropout. On the reflectivity map, there was a clear round hole in the middle of a solid rain shield southwest of Waikini. Not oval, not ragged, not like a dry slot or weak echo region. A clean circle, maybe 2 miles across, where there should have been precipitation. Around it, the rain was moderate to heavy. Inside it, nothing. Black background. No returns. I leaned closer to the monitor and dragged the loop back 5 frames. The hole wasn't there at 5:12. At 5:14, a faint dark curve showed up. At 5:16, it was a full circle. By 5:18, it had sharpened. I said, that's weird. Talia didn't look up. What is? Radar's got a dropout. Like a glitch? Maybe. I switched radar sites. We usually use the Dodge City feed for storms southwest of us, but I pulled up Goodland and then Wichita just to compare. The circle was on all of them. Not exactly the same strength because of beam angle and distance, but it was there. That made me sit back. Single site glitches happened. Ground clutter happened. Birds happened. Wind farms made messes. But a clean circular void showing on multiple radar sites inside active precipitation was not something I had a good explanation for at 5:20 in the morning. I saved a screen grab, mostly out of habit, and kept watching. The circle moved west. That was the part that made my stomach tighten. Everything around it was moving northeast. The storm cells, the lighter rain, the outflow, all of it. The hole moved in the opposite direction, slowly but clearly, like someone sliding a coin under a printed map. It didn't drift with the storm. It cut back through it. I checked velocity. The storm winds were messy, but the general flow was exactly what I expected. Inbound and outbound colors where they should have been. No obvious rotation where the circle was. No tornado center, no debris, nothing that matched the shape. I checked correlation coefficient because sometimes hail or biological stuff could make odd patterns. It looked normal around the edge and blank inside the circle. Blank in a way that bothered me. I zoomed out, thinking maybe some radar artifact from the sun angle or a ducting issue was making a ring. The circle didn't stay centered on any radar site, though. It moved through the weather, independent of the scan pattern. Talia finally came over with her coffee. What am I looking at? I pointed. That. She squinted at the screen. Is that supposed to be there? No. Is it dangerous? I don't know what it is. That was a stupid answer for a meteorologist to give, but it was the truth. The 6 o'clock show was coming up, so I tried to put it out of my mind and focus on what people needed to know. Rain along I-70, lightning near Ellis, small hail possible, don't drive through flooded roads, all the usual stuff. I did the cut-in clean. No one watching at home would have known I was thinking about a 2-mile wide empty circle moving the wrong way through a storm. After the cut-in, I expected it to be gone. It wasn't. It was bigger. By 6:07, the hole had widened to maybe 3 miles across, and it had moved almost due west. Not fast, maybe 20 miles an hour, while the rain around it was moving northeast around 45. It kept its shape the whole time. The edge looked unnaturally sharp on base reflectivity, like rain just stopped at a boundary. Grant woke up at some point and wandered in, rubbing his face. "Why do you both look like that?" Talia said. "Ben found Weather Pac-Man." I didn't laugh. Grant came closer, saw the radar, and said, "Oh, that's not great." He didn't know weather, but he knew enough from working in local news to understand when something on a screen made the weather person stop blinking. I called the National Weather Service office in Dodge City, not the public line. We had a direct number for media coordination. A forecaster named Lyle picked up. I knew him a little. He was calm, older, dry sense of humor, the kind of guy who could tell you a tornado warning was going out in the same tone he'd use to order a sandwich. I asked if they were seeing the reflectivity hole in Trego County. There was a pause. Then he said, yeah. Just that. I waited for him to tell me it was bad data or radar maintenance or chaff from a military exercise. He didn't. What are you thinking? I asked. Another pause. We're checking a few things, he said. Is it a known artifact? Not one I'm comfortable calling. That was about as close to nervous as I had ever heard him sound. He asked if we had any spotters near the area. I said, not at that hour, not in that weather, but I could check traffic cams and public feeds. He told me not to send anyone into the storms for it. He said it quickly, like he wanted that part clear. I hung up and started looking for cameras. There wasn't much. Rural Kansas at dawn in a storm didn't offer a lot of live views. The KDOT camera near I-70 showed wet pavement, low clouds, and headlights passing every now and then. Nothing strange. No hole in the sky, no beam of light, no obvious thing hovering over a field. Just rain and gray. Then the station lights flickered. Not enough to knock anything out, but the studio monitors blinked black and came back. The emergency lights in the hallway clicked on for 1 second, then off. Somewhere in the building, a printer started by itself. Talia looked toward the newsroom. Did we just lose power? No, I said. The radar feed froze. All 3 screens froze at 6:12:34. I remembered the timestamp because the seconds were stuck in the corner. The circle was right there on the image, a clean black disk inside yellow and red returns, and the whole loop stopped like a paused video. I moved the mouse. The cursor worked, internet worked on the browser, Slack still loaded, but the radar image stayed frozen. Grant walked into the newsroom and came back holding a stack of paper. The printer spit these out, he said. They were blank weather graphics from the previous week, except every page had a gray ring across it. Not printed sharply, more like toner smudged into a circle, different positions on each page. One of them had the ring overlapping the station logo. Talia said, "Okay, I hate that." I told myself the printer had glitched during the power flicker. That was possible. Cheap office equipment did dumb things. It didn't explain the radar. The feed updated all at once at 6:15. The circle had jumped. It was farther west now, close to the county line, and for 2 frames it wasn't a circle anymore. It had stretched into a tall oval like something seen from an angle. Then it snapped back to round on the next scan. I didn't say anything for a while. I just recorded the loop and saved it locally, then exported the raw frames because I had a bad feeling the online archive might not keep whatever this was. The weather outside our station was mostly quiet by then. We were east of the storms, under a low gray sky with light rain. The parking lot had puddles, and the flag by the furniture store hung wet and limp. There was no wind at our building. The radar showed the anomaly still moving west against the storm flow. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from my friend Nate Rourke, who farmed with his dad south of Collier. Nate wasn't a weather spotter officially, but he sent me hail photos sometimes. His message said, "You seeing something weird on radar west of us?" I typed back, "What are you seeing?" He didn't answer right away. The typing dots appeared, stopped, appeared again. Then he sent a photo. It showed a flat gray sky over a field, taken through a wet windshield. At first, I didn't see anything except rain and a utility pole. Then I noticed the cloud base. There was a round lighter patch in it, not a hole exactly, more like a smooth circular thinning in the low cloud. It didn't look dramatic. If I hadn't been staring at radar all morning, I might have missed it. Under the patch, the rain looked different. The rest of the scene had slanted rain streaks pushed by wind. Under that round area, the rain fell straight down, thin and pale, like strings. I called him. He answered on the 3rd ring and said, "I'm not getting out of the truck." "Where are you?" "County Road Z, by the old elevator. I was checking water over the low crossing." "What does it look like?" He breathed through his nose before answering, like the clouds got a bald spot. "Any rotation?" "No." That's the weird part. Nothing's moving right. The rain is coming down straight in one spot, and everything around it is blowing sideways. Do you hear anything? He didn't answer. Nate, hold on. The line got muffled. I heard rain tapping on glass and his truck engine idling. Then he came back, quieter. There's a tone, he said, that made my hands go cold. What kind of tone? Like when the grain dryer runs, but far away, low. I told him to leave. He didn't argue, which scared me more than if he had. Nate was the kind of person who drove toward hail if he thought it might damage his wheat. He said, yeah, I'm going. The call crackled. I heard his truck accelerate over wet gravel. Then he swore. What? There's birds on the road. What do you mean birds? I mean birds, a bunch of them, just sitting. The call dropped. I tried calling back. No service. On radar, the circle kept moving west. The really unsettling part was how the storms reacted around it. That sounds too strong maybe, but I don't know how else to describe it. The rain echoes didn't just vanish inside the circle. They bent around the front edge. Little bands curved away from it like water flowing around a rock in a creek, except the rock was invisible and moving against the current. I checked satellite, but the clouds were too low and thick to see much. I checked lightning data. There had been frequent strikes along the line before, but around the anomaly there was a gap. Lightning to the north, lightning to the south, nothing inside or near the circle. At 6:29, the phone system in the newsroom rang on 3 lines at once. Grant grabbed one, Talia grabbed another. I took the weather desk line. An older man said, "Are you people seeing this?" I asked where he was calling from. "Grainfield," he said. "South of town." "What are you seeing?" He lowered his voice, even though he was calling a TV station. "There's a round place in the clouds with no rain. It's going the wrong direction." I asked if he could take shelter and stay away from windows. He said he was in his barn with the door open. I told him to close it. He said, "The cows are all facing it." Then the line clicked dead. Grant's caller was a woman from Waikini who said her porch lights were pulsing even though her power wasn't out. Talia's caller was a truck driver on I-70 who said his compass app kept spinning and his dash cam had shut off. None of it was enough to go on air with. That was the frustrating part. We had storms, real storms, and my job was to talk about real hazards. I couldn't get on television and say there was a mysterious radar hole moving against the wind and people's cows were facing it. So I kept it simple. During the next cut-in, I showed the storm line but zoomed the map just enough that the circle sat near the edge of the graphic. I talked about heavy rain and lightning and poor visibility. While I was talking, the circle disappeared. I saw it on the studio monitor as I stood in front of the green screen. One scan, it was there. The next scan, gone. The rain shield filled in behind it like nothing had happened. No weakening, no break, no track left behind. I finished the cut-in on autopilot. When we came back to the weather center, Talia was standing very still beside my desk. "You need to see the loop," she said. She had the last 20 minutes running on one of the side monitors. The circle moved west frame by frame, steady and clean, then at 6:41 it stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Stopped. It held in place for one scan while the storm continued moving through it. Then the whole circle collapsed inward. That was what it looked like on radar. The blank area shrank from the edges toward the center over the course of one scan, then disappeared. The reflectivity filled in around it, but for 2 frames there was a tiny black point where the middle had been. Then nothing. Nate called back at 6:48. He sounded shaken and angry, which was how he got when he was scared. "I'm home," he said. "What happened?" "I don't know. I lost the road for a second." "What do you mean?" "I mean I was on County Z, and then I was turning into my driveway." His farm was almost 9 miles from where he said he had been. I asked what time he got home. He said he didn't know. His truck clock had reset to 12. His phone was dead, even though it had been charging. He said all the birds lifted off the road at the same time, right before his phone cut out, not flew away in a normal way. Straight up, he said, like they were pulled. Then he said there was a shadow in the rain. I asked him to explain. He got quiet. Not on the ground, in the rain, like something above me blocked part of it, but I couldn't see what. I didn't know what to say to that. He asked me not to use his name on air. I said I wouldn't. Then he said he needed to check on his dad and hung up. By 7, The sun was up behind the clouds and the storms had weakened. The office started feeling normal again because morning staff arrived, lights came on, people complained about coffee, and someone microwaved oatmeal. It should have made me feel better, but it didn't. The radar archive updated around 7:20. The anomaly was missing from it. Not hidden, not blurred, just not there. The archived loop showed the same storms, same county outlines, same timestamps, but the rain shield was continuous where the circle had been. If I hadn't saved local copies, I would have thought I had misread the live feed. I called Lyle at Dodge City again. He answered with his normal voice this time, which made it worse. I asked if their archive showed it. He paused. Then he said, "We had some bad frames earlier." On multiple radar sites? Looks like a processing issue. You said you were seeing it. I saw something that looked like a processing issue. That was not what he had said before. I asked if they had gotten any spotter reports. He said none that were actionable. I asked if he wanted my saved frame.